Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It's August 16th, 2026, and we are here to talk about the world, current events, foreign policy, economics, you name it, we'll talk about it. Another episode of World Discussion with Agent Smith. Smith.
Hello.
Sire.
Hey, how are you?
Doing very well. How about yourself?
No, can't complain. Fought and well fed. There are worse fates.
That's good. Having a calorie, sufficiency and surplus is a really great luxury of the modern era. If you're in a country that has that option.
I concur. I strongly recommend the experience.
Being hungry is less fun than enjoying good food.
Mm.
But in a way, managing your hunger response and having a relationship with it where you tolerate some of it to just give yourself a fasting period, that has its edges as well. I've been able to do that a bit more since adding animal products on my diet, is have longer periods between meals and sometimes feel a bit hungry, but know that I have a bunch of calories and a bunch of protein ahead, so it's fine. You can be hungry for a little bit, and that's good to master about yourself. But it's not fun for anyone, or for most people. Our instincts tell us that calories in the future are unknown. We don't have a guarantee of tomorrow. There could be a catastrophe, there could be a crop failure, there could be any number of things. And in the ancient hunter-gatherer human pre-civilization, I guess you could say, we had to live off the land, and each next meal was hard fought for. You either had to go out in prickly bushes and get berries that had smaller yield than modern, like, industrial farming berries. Like, those are huge. We make massive strawberries now, huge blackberries. All stuff is basically genetically selected to yield the most dividends. But back in the day, you had to go kill shit if you wanted to eat meat. You had to go pick berries in inconvenient ways, and you didn't have these fields of grain and rice and stuff. Like, that's relatively modern in the lifespan of humans overall. So yeah, thanks for food.
Yep. Much more efficient now.
Yep. But I've had an interesting and good week of Dota. The big tournament TI is going right now, so it's the biggest tournament of the year, largest prize pool. I think it's $3 million prize pool. So still a very strong and big esport. It's being hosted in Shanghai this year.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
Yep. China is one of the strongest Dota countries in the world. For each of the kind of internet connected countries, they basically chose a MOBA game within the genre. South Korea and Japan both chose League of Legends over Dota 2. So their best esport players are all League of Legends teams. They don't really have strong presence in the big tournaments in Dota. Whereas China is a very strong Dota country. I don't know if China is strong in League. I assume they are as well. They're just a big enough country. But yep, it's hosted in Shanghai. And it's been interesting seeing how the meta of what people choose and how they play, it develops really tightly because the best players in the world are being broadcasted constantly. So if anyone does anything good, anyone could copy that. So it kind of builds on other people's success of what people are choosing to draft in terms of heroes and how they're trying to find win conditions and so on. And I got a treat a couple nights ago, which actually last night. Yatoro, the arguably best carry in the world, which is the role that I specialize in, he played a Terrorblade game in the elimination match that he was in the final game. It's a best of 3. Whichever team loses this series is out of TI and they don't go to the main event. And he chose the character that I play the most and did a build that I haven't seen before. And it looked really strong. He went 11 kills and 0 deaths, and he killed all the enemy's buildings. He got almost all the building damage in the game by himself. So it was really strong. And he built items that allowed him to interact in the match earlier than I've been trying to. Terrorblade, he scales. His stats get really big over the course of the game. So he's really good in the late game. So I was kind of fixated on trying to get to the late game and succeed there. But he has a build where he is a massive threat in the mid game. Like, he comes online a full 10 to 12 minutes earlier than I was trying to do stuff, and he's solo killing people. So I copied his build, and today, every time I tried his build, I won. The one time I tried my old build, I lost. So it's a really cool breakthrough where I get to see someone who's the best in the world at what I'm trying to do, and I get to research what he's doing and copy a lot of his moves. So they have a really cool system in game for tracking what items people got and stuff, and they did a good job of posting about it. So after a match, they post the VOD right away, and then they also post the match ID. So you could plug in that number in your Dota client, and you can watch the replay, pause it, take people's perspective and stuff, and kind of look at the data. So very, very cool to get to research some high-level Dota and TI. We learned some Terrorblade today. Yeah.
It's always good to be making progress.
Yeah. I kind of starve for content with being a Terrorblade specialist because not many people play him. So there's just not as much material for that.
Huh.
Yeah.
Why is that?
You manage a bunch of illusions. So instead of him just being one hero that you're clicking around the map and casting spells with, he has 2 Manta style illusions because he builds that item every game. And then he can have like another 3 to 4 illusions just from his second ability. And then he has a health swap where whatever his health number is, he swaps that with a target enemy or ally. So if someone's really healthy and you're about to die, you could swap with them and then survive. So he's got a lot of buttons to push. All of his abilities are activatable, so you have to push a button for every single one. He doesn't have passives. A lot of heroes have stuff that you don't have to click. It just benefits the character or is an aura around them or something.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why he's rare. It took me a long time to get 50% win with him, but the reason I specialized in him is it seems like he can do a lot on his own, and he's the kind of carry hero that a lot of Smurfs will pick because he just has such an ability to farm fast by himself and to push the lanes really hard by himself. Even if his team is failing at what they're doing, he can succeed by pushing really hard somewhere far away from that, and then he's fast enough that he can run away if people chase him. So he's got a lot of upsides that are very fun to play out, but he's very fragile to magic damage. And the meta right now is picking really strong wizards and mages that have powerful spells that hurt super hard. So that's not the best environment for him because that plays his weakness. So the genius aspect of this build that Yotaro did was it's buying a silence item relatively early. He gets his farming items to be able to farm fast, and then his very first item is a silencing item. So all of those wizards that counter him, he silences them when he goes up to them. It's crazy. But it doesn't scale into his stats or his illusions, so it's kind of counterintuitive that he would choose to make that. But when I tested it, it's incredibly strong. You can solo kill people. You have a defensive tool if they're trying to cast foul magic at you, and yeah, it gives you tempo and momentum in the game, which is also good for the whiny baby Dota morale. Because if you're succeeding, then they're less likely to cry. And that's important.
I guess that's the Dota equivalent of a resource you have to manage.
Yes, it is. Morale is a very important resource because if it gets low enough, kind of like how troops will break in real life combat, people will sit in the base and they'll AFK and they'll say, nope, I'm not walking out there. And it's like, but we have to take this position. Nope, I'm not leaving the bunker. I'm done. They do that.
Some people.
Yep. Well, despair is a real human emotion and it befalls many people. I would use the example of Han Solo as a good mindset for approaching situations where you have a low chance to win. There's an asteroid field in one of the OG Star Wars movies, and they're trying to fly through the asteroid
Empire
field.
Strikes Back.
Yeah, they're being chased by Imperial troops through an asteroid field, and C-3PO won't shut up about how low of a chance they have of getting through the asteroid field. And there's no time to debate what their odds are here. And Han Solo just snips back at him. He says, don't tell me the odds. And he just steers the ship through it. So whatever the odds were, you're still going to try. And it doesn't matter what the odds are. Just try. Just go through the fucking asteroid field. Just shut up about our chances. And in Dota games, I've had a lot of those really low percent chance to win, games that we win, because there's still a chance to win. And the name of the game is Defense of the Ancients, so you just still try to win. You never know how the opponent can throw. People throw in exciting and creative ways that you've never before seen. And you want to be there to see it because it's hilarious when it happens. So there was just a match this past week where the enemy team had a 99% chance to win. And this is based on other drafts that have had similar net worth. It just analyzes, okay, over previous games with these heroes, you now have 1% chance to win. And I remember there was someone on my team in voice comms who said, Siren, can we still win? And I said, yes, we can still win. I'm stronger than their carry. And if they keep attacking us, then they will throw and we can kill them. And my support players, I had 2 good players on my team. I had 1 terrible player on my team and 1 decent player on my team. And I knew that with the 2 good supports, they could help me succeed and win the game. And the enemy team, they got impatient. They knew they were ahead. They tried to force the issue. They died over and over again. And then we win. So, like, be that 1%. Be the percent of player that just says, okay, I know we still have a non-zero chance to win. So what if I'm that outcome? I could be that outcome if I just keep moving forward and keep trying shit.
That's a good mindset.
Yeah. Fuck it. Just try. Who cares? It's a video game. Calm down.
Yeah. So has you done anything but Dota? I mean, has anything else happened in the past week other than the Dota progress?
Yeah, we had a death in our WoW hardcore run on Thursday at level...
A death?
Yeah, so it's like playing World of Warcraft, but if a character dies, it's dead forever and you have to start over from level 1.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Oh, no, not the human player. No, the streamer is okay. He's going to be okay. Yeah. He thought someone died. No.
Yeah,
Vibe is going to live.
Blasé about it. I was a little taken aback.
I think I'm kind of like, oh yeah, Vibe died. Like, whatever. No. His character died. Vibe is in good health.
Okay.
We look forward to gaming with him. He's such a super gamer. He had another character of the same class that was only 3 levels behind this one, and he's already caught up. So he's ready to go for next week. So in the grand scheme of things, it didn't snap our momentum for hardcore. I have 1 death as well. My rogue died, the first character that I made in that run. So we very narrowly escaped death. My character in that run got down to 47 health. I posted the VOD to YouTube just yesterday or last night. It was very high adrenaline. It's interesting because WoW, compared to Dota and StarCraft, is a very, very chill game. But when the stakes are permadeath, every fight is kind of scary. Because if it goes wrong or something unlucky happens, you could have to re-roll, which is... You're basically gambling on tens of hours. It could be 20-hour character or something like that. And you have to start over if you mess up. So it definitely is exciting. It's not for everyone.
Wow. Well, my condolences to the player in question.
Yeah. He'll be fine.
I should hope so. So you're getting back into WoW? Is that what that is?
A bit. It's not the same format as what I was doing before. I'm not leading a guild, so I don't have administrative work to do between raids and stuff. And I don't have raid prep or raid times. We're just playing once a week, basically. I'm in 2 runs, so it's probably 10 hours of WoW a week for me right now, if I had to guess.
Gotcha. Well, that's too bad. I enjoyed the stories of intrigue from your admin days.
Yeah, no, they're definitely guild politics. That's a very... It's an inevitable element, because all of the ingredients for politics are there. You have loot, there's value to be had, and you have loot distribution. So we need to distribute the value of what we've obtained between each other. Boy howdy, is that a fucking human behavioral experiment if I've ever seen one. Because I had such a desire for fairness and making everyone feel like they're enjoying WoW and being a part of the guild. Anytime people would like hard complain, they're like, oh, this loot system is so bad for me. It's so bad. It's so terrible. It's unfair. It's corrupt for these reasons, blah, blah, blah. I would be like, okay, that's fine. We'll fucking change it. So we changed our loot system maybe 4 or 5 times. Maybe someone in creation can fact check us on this, but it was at least 4 times, maybe more, that we completely changed the loot system. Because I'm trying to help people be happy and fucking get proper loot or whatever. And each one has an upside and a downside. Someone's always going to get a little bit more of a piece of the pie for one reason or another. The question is, what reasons are people willing to tolerate that seem fair enough? So, yeah. Very, very interesting human social stuff in World of Warcraft guilds. Who can you trust? That's another thing that becomes revealed through these kinds of experiences. IRL bonds are pretty strong. Random people that you meet on the internet, even if they're charming and kind of seem cool, they're not necessarily trustworthy. Some of the people, the two people who betrayed us, I would say are relatively high charisma, where they're kind of a smooth talker. They come across as sounding cool on voice comms. So you can almost see like cool kids at the lunch table in school, kind of a clique vibe with how they hang out. So if they choose to spend time with you, it makes you feel edgy and cool as well. But they were basically the least morally upright of anyone that we had in the guild. So, yeah, just because someone's cool doesn't mean they're good or that you can trust them. I have spoken. See any charismatic dictator.
Oh, yeah. Many such cases. I did have a short video for you. Doesn't have anything to do with World of Warcraft, just something that's been making the rounds online. I wasn't sure if you'd seen it yet.
Sure. What have you got?
Just some Russians mishandling a Gatling gun.
There's no gore, I trust.
No, no, no.
Okay.
Nothing dramatic. Oh, yeah, and I sent you an earthquake video.
Nice.
Yeah, there was another big one in Colombia.
I'll post this for chat. The one in the truck? Yeah. Wow. He really lost control of that. I would say the gun had more control of him. It's like when your dog takes you for a walk instead of you taking the dog for a walk. Just yeets them off to the side. The URL is crazy fucking videos. Yep. It's not that crazy. Well, it's pretty crazy, but there's no fucking in it, so it's safe for work. Wow. Okay, and the other one is the earthquake. I'll link this for chat.
Yeah, that was from Colombia. And there's been a spat of big earthquakes hitting relatively populated areas this year. I did read that there's not actually more earthquakes happening than usual. So there's not like a big upsurge or anything. You know, they're pretty much on trend, on pace for the usual number per year. It's just they've been hitting like more populated targets, and so you're seeing more dramatic footage this year.
Yeah. Well, and the thing about earthquakes too is these aren't happening in random areas. It's very well established what the geological fault lines are. So anyone who's in these areas, they typically know. It doesn't make it not scary, but they do know that it is an inevitable aspect of living in this region. So yeah, unfortunate to be sure, but not completely surprising. Damn, seeing the church kind of fall to the side. Crazy. Damn. Yeah, the only catastrophes that we have to soak in South Dakota here are extremely high winds, which can throw trees at you. It can knock out power, and then we haven't really had crazy blizzards. But I have heard that there are tornadoes every so often in South Dakota. I'm not sure if like in the area that I'm in, but it is definitely a natural phenomenon that can occur. If you're in Japan, you've got earthquakes and tsunamis. I think hurricanes are a thing too.
Where was that? Japan?
Yeah.
Yes, but they call them typhoons over there.
Mm.
I think there's technically a scientific distinction between them, but I'm not smart enough to remember what it was.
Mm-hmm. Oh, damn. Have you experienced an earthquake before?
Technically, yes, but not really. There was like a minor 1.0 thing that happened like 15 years ago in Dallas.
Mm.
Probably related to fracking, but who the fuck knows?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I didn't think it was an earthquake. I thought it was just like a dump truck or something that was driving by.
Mm-hmm.
I was surprised to see it on the news a couple minutes later. It was an actual earthquake.
Damn. I experienced some minor ones in LA when I was there. Some that rattled things on shelves, but nothing that was really catastrophic. And then there was one in Seattle that I experienced right when I moved into my new apartment. And I wasn't sure if I was like really drunk or high or something. I was very confused because I was like, man, it feels like the floor is moving. Like, what did I take something? I don't remember it. Like, what the fuck? And then I was like, oh no, this is an earthquake because you don't really have them in Texas. So I think that was probably
Mhm.
my first one that I really felt that actually shook the building around. And it was a very modern building, so it wobbled a
Yeah,
lot, and that was very trippy. But I survived and took no damage, and my apartment was fine. So
ideal
rel-
circumstance.
relatively minor still.
Yeah, that's got to be trippy. I don't know how I'd handle that.
No, the weird thing is you can't really do much about it. I don't think.
Well, I
But
imagine they've got like whole public campaigns about like what to do, in an emergency, that kind of stuff.
mm-hmm,
Because that's how we handle tornadoes in Texas. From
mm-hmm,
a very young age, people are teaching you about what to do, what not to do, and what not.
mm-hmm.
So I would assume that people growing up on the West Coast have a similar experience with earthquake preparation.
Yeah. For tornadoes, I believe being as far inside the house you can be, underground being the best,
Yeah,
but being away from any glass and windows and stuff.
yeah. Yeah, I remember a long time ago hearing or reading that you're supposed to open the windows, but then I heard later that you're not. So I'm not sure what the deal with that was. Regardless, you shouldn't be near windows.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they're not too bad if you can find a sturdy building.
Mm.
Maybe something made of brick. And a basement, yeah, is definitely preferable.
You've got some people who are heckin' storm chasers and they're trying to find the biggest tornadoes and video them.
Yeah, it's a fun hobby if you don't get hit by the tornado.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the only thing I remember about earthquakes is you're supposed to, if you can't get out of the building, then you should stand under a door. Is that what it was? Like a
Mm.
doorway? Something like that. I don't remember exactly what it was.
In any case, gratitude for surviving the calamities of Earth. Good job, everyone, surviving up to this point.
Up to this point. There's still time.
Yeah.
Have you ever heard of an earthquake storm?
No? That sounds like a Sharknado.
I guess it kind of does. Um, yeah, I don't know much about that either, but I had read a theory that one of the reasons for the Bronze Age collapse was that there was a series of earthquakes
Mm.
that hit around the Mediterranean at a much higher rate of frequency, basically. for an extended period of time, and that this did significant damage and was a contributing factor to the Bronze Age collapse.
Damn.
Yeah, I don't know if there's solid geological proof that that's a thing that happens. Just every so often, there's a spike in the incidence of earthquakes. But I thought that was an interesting theory.
Mm-hmm.
Just hanging out in Bronze Age Mediterranean, and then all of a sudden, all the urban centers are getting wrecked by earthquakes
Yeah,
every
unlucky.
couple years. That would be pretty wild.
Mm-hmm.
Well, was there anything that we wanted to get to this week?
Hmm.
I think you mentioned Bitter Sugar was interested in doing some history, but I don't know if we were going to do that today.
Oh, no, not today.
Okay.
Yeah, we need to pick kind of a time period and what the focus is so we can prep.
I think I did send them questions last time. Those included a bunch of history stuff. I probably wouldn't venture too far from that.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I can ask him if he wants to do it next week. Suits me.
Well, I didn't have anything too sexy this week. There's just more dumb shit in the Middle East. That seems to be the main thing.
Mm-hmm.
Some economy stuff, Indonesia and Japan. I don't know how exciting that'll be for most people, though. So, if there's anything else you want to get to, let me know.
Did I talk to you about Java in Indonesia?
If you did, I forgot.
Okay, because
What
I think
about Java?
I may have watched another geography video. Yeah.
Oh, nice.
I keep watching these geography videos, but it was one
Oh,
that was
good.
on Indonesia has a really high population, but they have a whole bunch of land on the eastern side that is part of like the same continent as Papua New Guinea, and it's way lower yield for like how fertile the land is for growing stuff. So the population is way lower as a result. But yeah, it talked about the history of how the Dutch had that at one point, and then they ended up giving it to Indonesia when Indonesia kind of arm twisted them into that. When most people who are Indonesian didn't live there, it was the Java island where the land is all volcanic soil and it's super fertile.
Yeah.
So the population there, I think they have a saying where if you drop a seed in Indonesia on Java, then a rice paddy will pop up. So super, super high yield soil, which is cool.
Yeah, very fertile.
Yeah. The quality of the land matters a lot for how high the population goes. And then another thing that I've been noticing about any of the videos that are about islands is having fresh water sources is completely vital to the population being high.
Yeah.
If it's low water, then there's going to be low population because the only water that you'll get is rain. And that can be enough to drink maybe, but it's not enough to irrigate as well. So you won't really be able to farm well. Even though it's an island, you might think of it as being tropical and beautiful, but that doesn't mean that it's livable.
Yeah, I think Indonesia benefits from monsoons, so they tend to get a lot.
Well,
Yeah, the population density on Java is crazy.
Yeah.
It's like well over 100 million people.
Damn.
And I believe Jakarta is located there. Yeah. And it's a mega city. Look up the pop on that.
I feel like Indonesia is the highest population country that people don't really talk about that much.
Oh, yeah. It's like 250 million people, something like that. But it's kind of in an out of the way spot. So it's not super dialed into a lot of the major conflicts in places like the Middle East. and it's not super economically integrated into the global economy. It is more so now than it was, in the late 20th century, but it's still not as integrated as certain other countries in the region.
Mm-hmm.
Thailand, Malaysia, etc., probably are more integrated into major supply chains than Indonesia. Let's see, population about 11 million, looks like. It's not really a mega city, though, is it? Oh, 42 million? Okay, that seems too high. There's got to be some statistical shenanigans going on there. I've never heard of a mega city with over 40 million people in it. That reminds me of Chongqing. It's a city in Sichuan province in China.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at lists of Chinese cities by population, Chongqing is sometimes at the top. And it's got like 30, 40 million, whatever people in it. And that statistic is inaccurate. That is not the population of the city itself. That's the population of the municipality of Chongqing. And the difference between the municipality and the city is that the municipality is actually a province that encompasses territory that goes well beyond the city limits of the actual city of Chongqing. Yeah, the municipality of Chongqing was actually carved out of Sichuan province a couple decades ago now, I guess. And it basically encompasses what had been the roughly eastern quarter, or maybe eastern third, of what had previously been Sichuan province. So it has the city of Chongqing in it, but it's also got a huge stretch of rural territory that encompasses a whole bunch of villages and other towns, and even some smaller cities. So technically, that territory is all the municipality of Chongqing.
Mm-hmm.
And it gets counted as part of the population. But the actual population of the city is more like 10 million people. Still a lot, but it's not 30 million or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I keep getting reminded of that problem by YouTubers. There's a bunch of, well, not a bunch, but there are occasional YouTubers who try to make China content. And one of the things they'll do is talk about the huge city you've never heard of with 30 million people.
Mm-hmm.
And then I have to suppress my rage.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of pro-China stuff I've noticed in social media. Like either promoting a brand or a place. I heard about how apparently Bali is getting ruined by influencers because it's pretty cheap to live there. So influencers will make kind of some fake coaching business and get enough money to live there and basically just talk bullshit and make a bit of money. So
Yep.
there's like a bunch of Westerner influencers in Bali for whatever reason.
Well, it's a very, very popular tourist destination. It's very scenic, and it's relatively open to foreigners.
Mm-hmm.
So it's an attractive locale for people who are, what are they called? Digital nomads, I think is the phrase.
Yeah.
So people who can kind of work from anywhere, they'll often choose exotic locales like that that have a relatively low cost of living.
Yeah. I'm technically that because I can
There
work
you
from
go.
anywhere. I'm work from home.
Go to Bali.
No.
No,
No.
it'll be an adventure.
Yeah, that's true.
What was it? You and Kukio were talking about Bangkok for a while back in the day.
Yeah.
It's not too late.
Yeah, it's true.
Shit, I'll go with you.
Okay, let's go.
Bangkok's a pretty cool place. I had fun there. I think it was only there for a week or so, but really fascinating place. Well, that eastern bit of Indonesia you were talking about is West Guinea, and the population there is, I want to say, Melanesian, if I'm not mistaken.
Mm-hmm.
And like you mentioned, like they're a very different ethnic group than the rest of Indonesia. Yeah, after Indonesia became independent, West Guinea was still part of the Dutch Empire for like 25 years, thereabouts. And after the Indonesians basically forced them to hand it over, things were okay for a while. But then in the past couple decades, there is a nascent independence movement that's sprung up. And the Indonesian government basically uses West Guinea as a resource tile. And they don't especially like the native population. The native population is kind of undeveloped, very, very heavily rural. And as a result, it's not especially well organized. There's not like a strong New Guinean middle class that can kind of organize resistance
Mm-hmm.
against the government. And that also means it's relatively difficult for the government to kind of build the Indonesian national identity because you kind of need urban schooling to build a national identity out of disparate peoples.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the only tool that facilitates that, but it's a major one. So if there's a population that is heavily rural or even tribal, they're not really getting exposed to that experience, and it's much more difficult to think of themselves as being part of a bigger nation.
Mm-hmm.
So West Guinea has seen increasing levels of discontent and unrest over time. Yeah, the separatists don't really have a lot of resources though because they're very poor, so they haven't managed to do much with it, but they are increasingly active.
Are they the same religion?
No, they're either animists or Christians.
Hmm.
Probably mostly Christians by now, I would expect. There is a Muslim population in West Guinea, but it's almost entirely people that come from outside West Guinea, from the
Mm-hmm.
rest of Indonesia. Generally, they come there to work in mines or other such things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Indonesia does not have a great track record with dealing with restive minorities. They occupied East Timor for, what was it? I think that was 25 years, thereabouts. Did a lot of crimes there.
Hmm.
Many war crimes were committed.
Oh no.
The population in East Timor was relatively small, so the total death toll didn't really hit big ticket numbers like Europe in the mid 20th century, but as a proportion of the population, yeah, it was relatively high. Yeah, eventually that was resolved peacefully with a peace agreement signed between the Indonesian government and the independence forces in East Timor. And East Timor then became an independent country again in, I want to say, the year 2000, maybe 2001, something around there. But it was this pretty similar scenario. Like the people didn't really want to be part of Indonesia, and the Indonesian government basically just used it as a resource tile. Lots of state-owned extractive industries set up there and made money off of local resources without giving much, if any, money to the locals.
Mm-hmm.
They certainly didn't spend much on dealing with the negative externalities of mining in the area.
Externalities. What a good word.
Yeah, that's me betraying my economics background. You'll read a lot about that. Oh. Have you ever heard of Sumatra?
Yes.
Yeah, that's the big island in the west of Indonesia. They've kind of got their own thing going on.
What's their thing?
Similar to the They're similar to the people on Java, but they have their own distinct ethnic identity. And historically, they haven't really been ruled by the same empires. There's not really a lot of historical overlap there. I actually met a guy from Sumatra back in the day, and the way he told it, the perspective that Sumatrans have of the people of Java is kind of a rural urban thing. You know, they kind of see the Java people as being more sophisticated, richer, but also duplicitous. You know, they lie and they're manipulative, that kind of thing. It's the kind of dynamic you can kind of see anywhere. I read a very similar account of how barbarians in southeastern Europe perceived the Byzantines back when the Byzantine Empire was a thing. They saw them as being rich, sophisticated, urbane, but also extremely unreliable, just lying incessantly, manipulating them at every turn. It's not a great way to build relations with the people, to just manipulate them, but apparently it happened enough that it became a core trait in the eyes of many of the Byzantine Empire's neighbors. So similar dynamic with the Sumatrans. You know, they were poor, they were kind of a hill people in many regions, and so they didn't really get along too well with the Java guys. Yeah, after the Indonesians regained, I guess, their independence in the 1940s, the Sumatrans became very restive very quickly, and there was an actual independence movement there that ran hot and cold for about 50 some years, thereabouts. Actually, probably a little more than that, 50, 60 years. And fun trivia about that, in the, I want to say the 1950s, the Sumatran separatists were actually supported by the CIA. And we know about that because the CIA fucked it up and they ended up getting caught, basically red-handed. Yeah. So there was quite the fallout there. The Indonesian government was not happy about it. Mind you, in the 50s, the Indonesian government was not yet aligned with the United States in the Cold War. They were trying to maintain neutrality. And the Suharto government, which ran Indonesia at the time, it was not explicitly pro-Soviet, but they were skeptical about capitalism, and they had these sort of claims, if you will, on land on their border, like West Guinea or East Timor, and most important for the 1950s, Malaysia, specifically the Malaysian territory on Borneo. And there were actually several years of undeclared conflict with the British Empire in Borneo over those claims. So there was some tension with the West over that. And Washington did not entirely trust the Suharto government on that count. Of course, all of that changed with the violence in the 60s, which resulted in the junta coming to power. They were very explicitly anti-communist and were happy to align with the United States. Yeah, but yeah, before that, relations were not great. So that's why the CIA backed the Sumatran separatists in the 50s. I think that conflict lasted until 2004. Because that was when the big tsunami hit. Do you remember that back in the day?
When was that?
2004. It was a huge ass tsunami. It was like a massive earthquake in the middle of the ocean, and it caused a huge tsunami that impacted all around the Indian Ocean.
I do not remember this. Damn.
Yeah, it was a big deal at the time. There was a whole bunch of dramatic footage. That is to this day like the biggest, most destructive tsunami in recorded history that we know of. I think you'd have to go way back to some written accounts from like hundreds of years ago for anything nearly equivalent. Yeah, if you haven't seen the footage, definitely check it out. It's pretty wild stuff.
Damn.
But anyway, that tsunami did a lot of damage to Sumatra's coast. And as a result, the Sumatran rebels actually reached a ceasefire with the government in order to allow for emergency response. And during that lull, during the ceasefire, they actually negotiated a peace agreement. And that peace agreement ended hostilities and has lasted to this day. Yeah, I think one of the tenets of the agreement is that the Sumatrans would have limited autonomy, which included the implementation of Sharia law, if I'm not mistaken.
Huh.
Yeah, there's not really a whole lot of hardline Islamism in Indonesia, but they do have some Muslim conservatives there. And like a lot of ethno nationalists, the Sumatrans partly defined their identity in terms of their religion. So when they had the opportunity for autonomous self rule, they implemented that in short order. Yeah, I don't think a whole lot of exciting stuff has happened in Sumatra since then. It's been pretty quiet. Generally, when you read about Indonesia, it's either stuff happening in Java, since that's where the capital is and a good chunk of the economy, or it's some kind of communal violence happening out east in some of the smaller islands. Or it's Bali. Bali, of course, also in the news quite a bit. I think the last thing I heard about Bali was that the Indonesian government was considering creating a tax haven there. And I think the idea was that they were trying to create a new financial center. So they were going to make it tax free for financial firms, something to that effect. Yeah,
Which,
I
as
guess
we
that
talked
could
about
work.
last week, it's just a place where you need to soak your ethics score a little bit because you don't know where the money's come from.
Yeah, pretty much. That's the gist of it. Well, given how many tourists they get and how many tech bros who kind of go there, it's maybe not the worst idea. Maybe you could get some small time investors, some crypto bros, and something like that. But I don't know if they're going to be able to compete with like Hong Kong or Singapore or something like that. I'm sure it'll aggravate the locals who don't really appreciate the sheer number of foreigners they already have to deal with. There has been some pushback on that count. Well, I guess since we're talking about Indonesia, we could talk a little more about its economy, which has not been doing great. It's not doing terrible either, but they are having some issues, and a lot of it is self inflicted. Basically, markets are losing confidence in the Indonesian government since they've been intervening in the economy a lot more. Since the current sitting president, Mr. Prubau, I think his name is. Apologize if I'm getting the name wrong. But since he came into office, he's been a lot more inclined to intervene in the economy, not because he's interested in improving things like social programs, that kind of stuff. He's more corrupt than that, basically. He's very much a part of the establishment in Indonesia. You know, for about, what was it? I think it was 8 years they had a, what was his name? Boko Widodo, I believe his name. He was a reformist. And the old school establishment guys were kind of out of power for a while, although not entirely. These were guys who had been in the extended network of, what was his name? No, Suharto. I got the names wrong. Suharto was the junta leader, and then Sukarno was the guy who led Indonesia in the 50s and early 60s. Yeah, that's my mistake. I'm sure somebody in chat probably caught that. So Suharto ran Indonesia as a military junta for several decades. And even after he was forced to step down as a part of the mass protests that resulted in Indonesia's democratization, his extended network was still kind of ensconced in Indonesia's government institutions. And so those guys were still hanging around even through the subsequent decades of democratization. Prabow's presidency basically marks their official return to power. Their return to power, at least in terms of actually controlling the executive. And one of their defining traits, beyond just corruption and self interest, is that they tend to lean into protectionism. They're more for self sufficiency, partly for strategic reasons, mostly because it creates opportunities for them to just seize assets and enrich themselves. That had been the pattern during the Cold War, and it seems to be repeating itself here in the Prabowo administration. So let's see. Part of the issue is just deficit spending. Indonesia had implemented a rule where they were required by law not to deficit spend beyond something like 3% of their budget. And the Prabowo administration has broken that rule and doesn't really show any signs of returning to it. So that has debt markets a little bit upset. And when debt markets get upset, that tends to create problems for the currency. And that's pretty much what we've seen. It hasn't been an explicit ongoing downward trend, but it has been very volatile and it has trended downwards, which has not been great for inflation in Indonesia because a devaluing currency increases prices, or at least it should. It's inflationary pressure, to put it another way. Another problem is that the head of Indonesia's corruption agency was arrested for, you guessed it, corruption.
Oh no.
Yeah. Yeah, this guy was very much of the Menendez school of corruption in that he hid his bribe gold in his house out in the open.
Wow.
Just kind of laying around. So when the authorities raided it, they found it pretty easily. So that's not really great for corruption, obviously, when your lead anti-corruption guy is himself taking bribes. And given that there were already questions about whether or not the Prabowo administration was going to be corrupt, that kind of sealed the deal for a lot of people. Pretty clear that was the direction they were going to go in. And so whenever things like that happen, it knocks market confidence. Markets like to know that their investments are going to be safe. And the more corruption there is in a given economy or society more broadly, generally the less safe your investment is. So that's not to say that investors are completely averse to investing in corrupt societies. Obviously, they do. But they calibrate their investment to the level of corruption, right? They're not going to take big, risky investments in a place where rule of law is less than safe. So in general, if markets think there's a level of safety and then it becomes more apparent that that level of safety is degrading, they're going to start hedging more and more, and that society will see less investment over time. So that's been the impact here with this corruption scandal, among others. And that kind of brings us to the next corruption scandal, which was the food program. So one of the things the Prabowo administration has done is to try to build popular support with a new lunch program that provides free food to students. And the idea is, of course, that much of Indonesia's population, especially in rural areas, is very poor. People can't always afford food, at least sufficient food, shall we say, for their students and kids. The lunch program is going to help alleviate that. Clearly a vote winner, right? Stuff like that is always pretty popular. The problem with the program is that, one, it's very expensive. I think it's something like 9% of their total budget at this point, which is kind of crazy for a fucking lunch program. And the other problem is that, once again, the guy heading the program was indulging in corruption, basically selling selling contracts instead of using the open bid process that you're supposed to use when you're trying to contract out services for something like that. So that just added on to the general perception that rule of law in Indonesia is in decline and that it is less and less safe to invest there.
I see. Damn, the anti-corruption guy being corrupt. What a tragic story.
Well, I mean, if you're going to be a corrupt politician, one of your first moves is going to be to try to neuter institutions of government that are specifically designed to inhibit that kind of behavior.
Mm-hmm.
So not that surprising that in this case, the agency in question was handed over to a loyalist who had no intention of actually fulfilling the agency's mandate. You would think they would do more to try to hide it, but apparently not.
Yeah, well,
Yeah, hide your bribe gold, folks. Rookie mistake.
it's over there in the gold safe with all the other gold. Yeah, I have a shitload of gold. It's right over there. It's like, oh, but that's bad. You're corrupt. Well, it's a lot of gold.
I don't know if it was as bad as the actual Menendez case, where it was literally sticking out of the pockets of his clothing.
Is that a shitload of gold in your pocket, or are you just happy to see me? Oh, it's a shitload of gold. I'm a corrupt official. Oh, okay.
Yeah, subtle as a brick.
Yep.
So to kind of skip ahead here, this has not been entirely disastrous for Indonesia. I actually did hear that foreign direct investment is actually still increasing. So it's not all bad. But you've got to think there's going to be an opportunity cost. My guess is that a lot of that FDI is probably in very specific sectors like mining, where industry actors have close ties with government officials. So if you're operating in a corrupt economy, if you are going to take the risk of investing, you generally want to invest in projects where you're going to work with the local who has good government connections. That's probably one of, if not the main way, that you hedge the risk of corruption in an economy you're working in. And mining has been doing really well in Indonesia. You know, the AI boom. Sorry, what?
What do they mine?
Nickel's the big one. That's the one that you're going to read about if you look it up. There are others as well. But nickel is used in the production of stuff like semiconductors and whatnot. And because of the AI boom, the value of those kinds of goods has skyrocketed.
I see.
So mining exports have taken off correspondingly, and there is a corresponding boom in investment. But investment had been, I think, more diverse before the recent drama. Indonesia had broadly been seen as a standout in Southeast Asia for a long time. Economic growth was pretty good, rule of law was sufficient, FDI was pretty solid, even in industries and sectors beyond just the mining sector. Now, a lot of that is in question. And it's not clear how much longer it's going to last before there is some kind of run on Indonesian debt. We shall see. So long as their fundamentals are at least okay, it probably won't be too much of a problem. And given that a lot of the drama stems just from market confidence and the government's ability to manage the economy, the government could take relatively mundane, heterodox, not the right word. They could just follow economic orthodoxy, take a couple mundane steps, and a lot of that market confidence could come back in pretty short order. So this is a fixable problem such as it is right now. It's just not clear if the government cares enough to do that. Because presumably they're making money off of all the dumb shit that they're doing. And maybe that's a more important priority for this government than actually having a solid, good economic policy. You know, good governance, in other words. So while FDI has not really suffered too much from this, the currency has devalued. There is a problem there. And the government has responded not by taking the kind of orthodox steps that you would normally take on the advice of an economist, such as myself. Rather, they have been indulging in financial repression. And this is really not helping with the perceptions of markets that the government here is kind of trying to get away with shit. Again, if you're trying to restrict the flow of capital to deal with the currency crisis instead of cutting spending, raising taxes, doing all the usual stuff that governments are expected to do, you're generally perceived as trying to avoid taking responsibility for the problem so that you can continue doing whatever dumb, corrupt bullshit that caused whatever currency crisis you're experiencing. So some of the things they've done here, just to kind of elaborate, they passed some rules requiring exporters to keep the dollars they get for sales abroad within the country's financial system for at least a year. Now, in a free and open system, if you sell stuff abroad, you can take the dollars you get from that and use it for whatever. You can take it abroad and invest it. You can invest it in your business. It's just kind of wide open. With the changes in Indonesia now, you don't have that flexibility. You have to keep that money within Indonesia. And the point there is to prevent money basically from leaving. You want to keep as many dollars as you can in the economy in order to prevent capital flight. Because one of the things that happens when markets lose confidence is they'll start withdrawing money. They'll sell off assets and they'll take dollars and they'll move them out of the country. And that puts downward pressure on the currency. So, in order to try to alleviate some of that pressure, you can make it relatively more difficult to move dollars out of the economy. And this is one of the ways you can do that. Basically, all of these changes I'm going to talk about are in that vein. So, another thing they did is they lowered the total value that you can import without submitting paperwork for approval. So, this is basically the same idea. If you're importing stuff, then you're having to buy foreign currency. And that means more of your currency is out on the market, which has a devaluing effect on the currency. So one thing you can do to try to float the value of your currency is to just make importing stuff more difficult, to try to inhibit that outflow. So the idea there then, well, that's the idea, right? And so what they do here is they create barriers. This isn't like a full block, right? You can still import stuff, but now you have to submit paperwork and try to get approval, and that delays things and just acts as a general deterrent. So there will be somewhat less importing going on because of that, which should help with the currency. Let's see. And also, and this is this is the most dramatic move. They actually created an agency that commodity firms, these are again the mining firms in the country, have to sell their produce to. Whenever they mine anything, instead of taking that to international markets and selling it, they have to instead now sell that to this agency. And then the agency takes that output and sells it on to the international market. So the idea there is to basically ensure that all of the money from exports of minerals of any kind goes to the government instead of to mining firms in Indonesia. And that again has to do with trying to control dollars. They make foreign currency when they sell abroad. The government is just going to control that directly now because they're controlling the export of their main export item. So this is not a full nationalization of the mining sector in Indonesia, but it is a kind of de facto nationalization.
Yeah, you're making all the money go through you, which
Exactly.
you could do anything with that. I'm thinking there's certainly no corruption going to happen here, right?
Oh, yeah, you can see the obvious conflict of interest, the obvious problems. And given this government's reputation, that's almost certainly where the money is going. So contrast that with just saying, hey, we want to reassert our commitment to making Indonesia friendly to foreign investors. You can pass some minor tax incentives. You can reverse some of the restrictions you've imposed on the flow of capital. There's a lot of little things that you can do to restore market confidence. And they wouldn't even necessarily cost you that much. But they're not doing that. They are instead doubling down and establishing very strong government controls over the commanding heights of the economy. And again, these guys are not like socialists per se, at least not the ideological socialists. These guys are very much of the right-wing nationalist variety of statism. So that's the drama in Indonesia. It doesn't seem to be on track to getting better, but it could be that the government isn't going to make it too much worse either. It may be that they're just going for maximum rent extraction here. They want to get as much as they can by exploiting the government's powers over the economy to ensure maximum revenue into the government and basically embezzlement. And like any good parasite, you can only do that so much before you kill the host. And it may be that we're getting kind of closer to that boundary. So they'll probably take it right up to the line and then stop. That's my best guess, given their behavior thus far.
What would be the breaking point where a country would revolt against that?
Conditions would have to get way, way worse. like people having trouble getting enough food, large scale unemployment, probably a degree of state repression, state violence. You get all that combined together, you've got a pretty good recipe for some degree of popular unrest. But Indonesia is nowhere near that right now. Conditions are overall still pretty decent.
I see.
Yeah, if you hear about a debt crisis in the next couple of years in Indonesia, that could be the catalyst for it. That was actually the catalyst for democratization back in the 90s. The military junta controlling Indonesia, Suharto again, uh, he actually, stayed on past the end of the Cold War. He had kind of sufficient popularity in the country to kind of hang on for a number of years. But then the Asian financial crisis hit, and Indonesia got wrapped up in it and got hit pretty bad. And the resulting economic disruption facilitated mass unrest that ultimately resulted in Suharto resigning and the institution of a newly democratic government. So hypothetically, something like that could happen again. I would think that Prabhu would have learned from the experience in the 90s, but ambitious, corrupt assholes very rarely learn in the long run.
Yeah.
They learn in the short run. They're decent tacticians, but they tend to be poor strategists in the long run. They'll often make some of the same big mistakes over and over again, just because they're so, what's the right word? They tend to have tunnel vision. They've got a very specific set of ideas about the power that they want and the return on investment, so to speak, that they want. Basically the corrupt funds that they want to make. And they tend to hyperfixate on that to the detriment of their own interest at times. The smarter ones are better able to kind of balance things out over long periods of time, but Suharto was not one of those. And I'm skeptical Prabhu is either. Yeah, guys with a military background in particular kind of seem to struggle with that. The only military junta I know of off the top of my head that did pretty well in managing their country's economy was in Bangladesh. That was the ramen administration.
I like
Did
ramen.
surprisingly well. Sorry, what?
I like ramen.
Different kind of ramen.
Ah, damn.
Yeah, this isn't the kind of ramen you can make that you can add an egg to make it better.
I see.
Yeah. But
Unfortunately.
he did pretty well in Bangladesh. Suharto, much less so. Yeah, I think there was a dictator in, what was it, South Korea, who did okay in the 70s. But it's debatable how much of that is really attributable to him. Because economic development was kind of a running plan all throughout the Cold War for South Korea. Multiple administrations across changes of power in South Korea kind of have the same plan. So I would not attribute that to any one general in charge of the junta there. Thailand's had a whole bunch of juntas, and none of them have been especially good stewards of the economy. They tend to prefer to extract rents. That's more their thing. And they get really, really mad at anybody who wants to challenge that.
Yeah.
That's been on full display in the past decade or so. Well, anyway. Anything else you wanted to talk about regarding Indonesia?
What's the history of Indonesia converting to Islam, and what were they before?
Different folks in different parts of the country were different things at different times. So it's a very complicated question, actually.
Oh.
I want to say that originally, pretty much everybody was animists. They kind of had their own folk religions. For the western part of the country, so like I think more so Java and certainly Bali, Hinduism was a big deal. There were a number of South Indian princes who came over. Also, a lot of Indian merchants came over and spread certain Hindu religions. And so those got to be pretty popular. I think there's a really huge Hindu temple in Indonesia. It's not in use anymore, but uh, it's pretty big. And it's, I think, the only one left over from that era when Hinduism was the main religion there. Yeah. And then I want to say, like around the year 1000, probably even before 1000 AD, there was Muslim encroachment there, because a lot of Islam in Southeast Asia came by way of Muslim merchants, and they tended to expand well beyond the territorial limits of the actual caliphates. You know, the caliphates made it as far as the Indus River, I think, in South Asia. But a lot of the merchants continued well into southern India and then into Southeast Asia. And so Islam kind of spread out from some of the trading centers in the region, including Indonesia at that time, just from those people. And then around, no, I think they expanded, I think they converted pretty good chunks of Java and Sumatra in that sort of period from 700 AD to 1400. I don't think it was a fast process. You know, mass conversions take a lot of time, especially back in the day. But they encroached further and further inland from the port cities and then basically just became the dominant religion in Sumatra and Java. They did not spread to Bali. Bali became basically the last refuge for Hinduism in the region. Just kind of an out-of-the-way place that wasn't worth going out of anybody's way to seize. Now, when you get into the islands further east, I don't think Islam spread there as quickly. And the result is that they ended up encountering Christian encroachment that was occurring at about the same time, specifically from the Philippines and Spaniards and Portuguese missionaries operating in the region. So like Timor, the Spice Islands, parts of Celebes Island, all of these saw pretty significant Christian populations and conversions happening at roughly the same time Islam was spreading into those areas. And the result is that the region is much more diverse in religions than the rest of Indonesia.
See.
Relatively evenly balanced between Christians and Muslims. So yeah, that gives you an idea of how slow the process of expanding and converting Islam in the region was. You know, the Christians didn't get there until like the 1500s, more like the 1500s, and even though they got there so late, there were still plenty of territories that Islam had not even really touched yet.
Well, it seems like this wasn't as much like the way that Spain approached the New World. It's not like they were going out there to convert. It was the merchants are going out there to do merchant stuff, and they talk to people, and it ends up catching on. So interesting.
Yeah, the Portuguese were probably much more aggressive. That was more their style at the time.
You must be Christian. Be Christian now. They're like, oh my gosh, okay.
Yeah, they tended to be hard asses about it. But Muslim traders were generally more the vector for Islam, and they tended to be a little more chill. They spread pretty rapidly along established trade networks. Yeah, West Guinea saw a lot of Christian missionaries working it, so I don't think there was hardly any Islamic missionary work happening there. And then there's Borneo, which is its own little special case. It's they have tropical rainforest there, so the jungle is very thick and the conditions are kind of rough. But also the island never really hosted a big empire, right? There's not any major history of significant civilization there, at least as we would think of it. The population was mostly tribal and hunter-gatherer in nature. maybe some agriculture on the side, but not the year-round sedentary style agriculture that we're used to here. So the result is that Muslim traders or even Christian missionaries didn't really see an attractive target there because they tended to home in on the more built up areas. Again, the areas along trade networks, port cities, kingdoms, places like that. Missionaries loved places like that because one of their strategies was to home in on the king and try to convert him in the hope that his conversion would result in state support for converting the rest of the population.
Yep.
Yeah, so proselytizers of all stripes very frequently preferred to home in on the built up urban areas. And as a result, some of the more isolated rural areas tended to be discounted. So even as long as it took to get Christian and Muslim missionaries into the eastern part of the Indonesian islands, even into the 20th century, they had barely penetrated even then into Borneo. It was just that much of a backwater. So the population there had been mostly animist until the 20th century when missionary work significantly picked up. Now it's much more split. I think Borneo is mostly Muslim now. Well, of the religious population anyway, it's mostly Muslim, but I think that's still only like 20 to 30% of the population. Christians are kind of close behind, something like 20%. And then everybody else is still animist, I think. That might be old information. I imagine it's changed a bit since the last time I read about it, and that was a while ago. But that's what I'm remembering. That's my impression, anyway. Actually, that's probably a good cue for the usual disclaimer. I'm not an expert in everything I talk about on here. More painfully obvious at some times than others. So if I ever say anything wrong, stupid, or biased, please let me know. If I'm wrong, I want to know more than anybody. So participation by chat is encouraged in that regard. We do enjoy the feedback we get on here. I don't read chat while I do this, but I will read it later. And I always appreciate the opportunity to learn.
Thanks, chat, for your help. Yeah, islands end up creating quite a bit of isolation, which means you can have different religions and different species. One of the points of, I guess, West Guinea is what it's called, that made it unique was it has a more similar wildlife to Australia than to the main part of Indonesia, because it's part of the same tectonic plate and it's a separate island. And another reason why the population there ended up being way lower is because it's not part of, there's a strait, the name of it's escaping me, but a waterway that goes through the Indonesian islands, and anyone who's trying to go to East Asia and pass around that way has to go through there. So that ended up being a trading hub. But West Guinea is not so.
Yeah. Are you thinking of the Malacca Strait?
Yes, that's the one.
Yeah. Yeah, some big, powerful city-states cropped up there over the past 1,000 years, specifically exploiting the position along that major artery. Yeah, it's not just the wildlife in West Guinea, it's actually the people, too. Yeah, that Melanesian group of people there in the region has ties to the Australian Aborigines.
That would make sense.
Yeah, I don't know if they're like part of the same overarching tree, but they are related. Yeah, you can look up Melanesians and you'll get some good returns on the image search. You can get an idea of how distinct they look. If you saw them on the street, as an American anyway, you would probably assume that they were African American.
I think they can have light eyes too.
They sometimes do, yeah. Blonde hair as well. Yeah, very interesting group.
And that is less talked about.
What do you know about Papua New Guinea?
I think they used to do cannibalistic shit there.
There's probably parts of it where they still do. Wouldn't be surprised.
I
Well,
think
did you know that?
if it's the same
What?
as the other part of the island, then it's not super high yield for crops, but pretty decent. And yeah, very hot and humid.
Were you aware that part of it used to be governed by Germany?
No.
Yeah, it was not always a British territory, or at least half of it anyway. What is today Papua New Guinea was actually originally two separate territories. One of them was controlled by the British. That was the southern half, basically, of modern Papua New Guinea. The northern half was actually controlled by Germany and was part of the German Empire.
Hmm.
Yeah, they lost control of it after World War One as part of the Treaty of Versailles, and then it was handed over to the British. It was actually a good chunk of territory in Oceania that changed hands after World War One, because Germany had actually controlled what was it? What is now Micronesia, the Marshall Islands, and one of the other ones. I think it was the Mariana Islands. And all of those had to be given up as part of the peace treaty. And there was some debate about what should be done with them. And the result is that Japan got most of it. A lot of the Japanese empire, such as it was at the start of World War II, the Pacific War anyway, they actually got from Germany at the end of the war, of the World War One anyway.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned World War One because I just mentioned that with Namibia. That was German pre
Yeah,
World War One, and they lost it at the end of World War One.
yeah, same deal. Actually, I could make a map of that if you want to wait a minute.
Yeah, do it. Sounds fun. I like maps.
Let's see if
Visuals
I
are
can
nice.
do that. So this is Oceania, right? Oceania.
Mm-hmm.
I never know how to pronounce it. And people in chat have corrected me too, and I still can't remember. I think it's Oceania, right?
Oceania.
Oceania, okay.
I'm guessing. I can Google it real quick and see.
Let's see. Okay, so what is this is going to be pre-World War One. Okay. So then we'll do a little of this. Actually, I need to save this.
Oceania.
Oceania. Oceania.
Oceania.
Yeah.
Oceania. So I didn't get neither of my guesses were right. Go figure.
We tried.
We did. Okay, let's see. So this will be. I guess I'll just save it to the desktop. Oceania.
Like,
Wasn't that the name of one of the empires in 1984?
Maybe. I don't know.
Maybe that's why I can't pronounce it. I never learned it right in the first place. Let's see. Pre-Zoom. Okay. Desktop. Okay. We're good. We're safe. All right. So this one. So do you want dark gray for Germany?
Sure.
Okay. And then we'll do red for Britain. What color do you want America?
Blue.
Blue? Okay. Blue works. Let's see, it's the midway point, and then right down the peninsula. There we go. Something like that. And then we'll do dark gray for there. And then you wanted blue. Did you want light blue or dark blue for America?
Dark blue.
Dark blue. Okay. Let's see. That's Samoa. Oh, what about France?
France can be. Did you make the UK red?
Yeah,
France should be purple.
purple. Got it. Whoops. Not like that. Okay. Purple. There we go. Actually, one of these was a condominium that was jointly governed by France and Britain. Did you want a particular color for that?
Britain was red. France was purple. How can it
Yeah,
be pink?
there you go. All right. Almost done. Let's see. I think. I'm going to say all of this was British. Actually, I'm going to check my work on that. I'm looking at the Solomon Islands. I think it was always British, but let me check. Oh, it was actually German. Okay. Okay. I assume they got that from Spain, because I know that was originally colonized by the Spanish, hence the name. Okay, and then everybody's favorite bird shit island, Nauru. That's another one I want to say. What? No, that's another German. Huh. Really need to brush up on Oceania. Let's see. Okay, so this is roughly correct. Let's go with this. Okay, so then I'll send you that in Discord.
Nice, thank you. I will show chat after the game.
I have to find it on my cluttered desktop first, though.
Good luck. I don't know if you can go to recent files to be faster.
I got it. Okay, so there's that. And then you wanted an after for comparison. Oh, you know what? I fucked that up, didn't I? Whatever. Okay, so then post. What color did you want for Japan?
Japan can be white.
White. Okay, interesting choice. I don't know that we can do white here because the land territory on this map is all white by default.
Okay. Can there be dark red like maroon?
That'll work. Okay. What the fuck was that? Let's see. Yeah, Palau too. Makes sense. And then America was blue. Okay. Gotcha. All right, you're good to go.
Nice, thank
I
you.
might touch up that first one though. Oops. Okay. There we go. Now it's pretty.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah, Oceania I'm going to trip over that for the rest of my life, has been in the news more over the past 10 years. There's been a little more competition there for influence. I don't know how much of it is necessarily overt on the part of China, but they have been making inroads there. And Washington has not been happy about it, but also hasn't really done much about it. Seems to be the story of American strategy in the early 21st century. We don't seem very good at it. Let me see here. Okay, post World War One, that's done, and then I can do the other one too. Pre World War One. Yes, got it. Okay, and then I'll delete the other one.
So the first map I have up here, red is England, purple is France, blue is US, and gray is Germany.
Yeah. Oh, that's the deleted one.
Oh,
Don't use that one.
oh, that's the wrong map. Please forget everything you just saw. Thank you. Aha. Okay. Got them. I even overwrote the old file because you named them the same. Perfect. Okay. We have pre-World War One. I can just zoom in here. We don't need to see just the ghost of the rest of the world. Okay. So Hawaii up here, I can see for the U.S.
Yep.
French Polynesia, I would guess, is what this is.
Yes.
And there's a little chunk out here in red that the UK has. What is this?
Oh, that's the Pitcairn Islands. Yeah, that's. Do you remember the story of the mutiny on the Bounty?
That's just like one English ship that mutinied and they landed on an island and figured it out, right?
Yeah.
Ah,
Yeah.
I think I watched a little documentary on that place.
Yeah, it's a really fascinating story. Kind of sad, but it's interesting. But yeah, the islands, well, the island anyway that they landed on, that basically became the current territory of Pitcairn Islands.
The Bounty, just some ship. So the ship was significant. What was the ship doing?
My understanding is that it was on patrol in the region. Maybe there's more context I'm unaware of, but I don't think it was part of some larger effort in the region.
And I think if the memory is correct for the documentary, the people who just kind of stayed there, their descendants later claimed heritage to the crown, but I think the original mutineers would have been like, that's treason or whatever. You're mutinying against your government.
Yeah. That's actually why they picked the island that they landed on. They knew that the island that they picked was not actually accurately charted on the British Navy's maps, and that they would be very difficult to find for that reason.
I see. A sneaky island.
Yeah, very crafty. Yeah, it might have been a cool story of people creating opportunity for themselves in a new home, but they also kidnapped a bunch of natives and forced them to relocate with them. And that involved a not inconsiderable amount of forced marriage with the native women that they took.
Yeah, that's not very nice.
No, I'm afraid not. I think they ended up killing a lot of each other too after that. Yeah, it did not have a happy ending. It wasn't like, hey, we're being mistreated by the Royal Navy, so we're going to fuck off to a tropical island
Hmm.
and live well forever. It actually got real dark after they got to the island.
Damn. Interesting, intense pass to a very remote place on the Earth. And I'm guessing, just kind of thinking about the location of this region relative to the countries that are colonizing it, this is very, 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 very far, which means it's very, very hard to administrate
Correct.
and to like go after people if they get in trouble and so on. And I was just thinking, why did Australia go completely to Britain? Why did other countries not try to carve it up?
I mean, it's a desert. There's nothing there.
Oh.
If you're going to go colonize a place, you want it to either have lots of resources, or you want it to have lots of people, or you want it to be a major trading center, to have lots of money. And Australia just didn't have any of that shit. It was not an attractive target for colonization.
Then how come there are so many attractive Australian people?
Maybe the prostitutes? Lots of criminals were sent there. That was the main reason the British ended up colonizing it,
Hmm.
basically a penal colony. So I don't know. Maybe all that open air, open country, lots of exercise, lots of outdoorsy people over there
Hmm.
probably has an impact.
I see. Well, Britain does have a bunch of these islands next to French Polynesia. It's hard to make out what's in them. I'm guessing they're like tiny islands in these shapes that we can't really see. But Britain
Oh,
has
out in the
a lot of territory out here. The U.S. has, looks like, a little bit here, and then France has a little bit within this sea of British control.
Yeah, the French got a little bit here and there. The United States mostly just got Samoa. There was
Hmm.
actually a big competition in the region in the late 1800s for Samoa.
Hmm.
Yeah, Germany, Britain, and the United States were vying for territory in the island chain there.
Hmm.
It got pretty heated, but in the end, they basically just divided it between themselves. Not sure why Germany never got anything, come to think of it. I'll have to look that up sometime.
What's the story with the joint French and British area?
They both claimed it, and so they decided to just rule it jointly rather than fight over it. A victory of diplomacy over meatheads.
Huh. Interesting. Wow. Well, good job, whoever made a nice agreement.
Yeah, that form of government is called a condominium. You don't see that too often.
I guess they would have to find consensus on issues and stuff for administration. Like if there's a debate about something or an enforcement problem locally, then whatever officials represent both sides would all have to weigh in.
Yeah, I'm not sure on the details, but I imagine they probably had a council with officials appointed from both governments responsible for
Mm-hmm.
making day-to-day governing decisions,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe not making the decisions themselves, but appointing the governor who did. Yeah, I don't think it was ever an especially wealthy colony, so I don't know how much interest they really had in it. There was a big surge of European expansionism in the late 19th century, so there was probably a sense that somebody needed to grab it before somebody else did, and that was probably more the impetus than any real strategic consideration.
Mm-hmm. Was it partially based on like competition between each other? Because if you feel like other countries are taking these valuable territories, if we don't, then we're going to fall behind. Because they're all kind of doing it. There's the Dutch, the Portuguese, the Spanish, the French, the British, the Americans. They're all like grabbing some stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't have to. You don't have to invest resources in that. But they chose to.
Yeah. Part of that was political pressure. European empire was politically popular. in the late 19th century among many. And so there was a sense if you didn't, then you would be punished by the native voters if you lived in a democracy, or maybe by rival elites if you lived in a more autocratic country.
Mm-hmm.
But there was also a sense that, there was a scramble for resources, and that even if you didn't necessarily need all the resources you were fighting for, you might need them later.
Mm-hmm.
And it was better to deny them to a rival who could make more use of them.
I see.
And just kind of raw game theory.
Well, on this upper part of the map, I see all the German territory. There's part of Guinea, Papua New Guinea, and then they have some of the islands like further east outside of that, and then this whole big area north of New Guinea.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's one little bit that the U.S. has. What is that?
Oh, that's Guam.
Guam. What do we like about Guam?
We like that it's close to the Western Pacific. Well, it's in the Western Pacific. It hosts a lot of military infrastructure.
Ah, I see.
A lot of military bases are there. Yeah, it is let me see if I can remember this correctly. An unincorporated territory. No, I don't remember. Incorporated basically is a state, unincorporated is a territory, but there's also another designation. Organized, I think that's it. So Guam is a organized, unincorporated territory. So that means it's not a state, it's a part of the United States, but it does have its own government that kind of governs its own affairs. So this is this is basically what all overseas American territories are, by the way. Unincorporated, organized territories. The only exception is American Samoa, which is unincorporated but unorganized. And that's a weird technical artifact, basically, from when it was incorporated into the United States, because it actually does have its own government that governs its own affairs. But it's not technically recognized legally as such by Washington, for reasons too esoteric for me. I don't remember.
Interesting. What happens on Samoa? Because I think it has a pretty well-known population and culture. Like Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson is Samoan, so there's definitely a Samoan impact in the U.S. What's the history there? Is it pretty fertile? So there's high population for its size?
Not really. I think it's like 50,000 people, 60,000 people, which is relatively high for a small Pacific Island nation, but not that many overall. Yeah, let me look up Samoa population. Oh, yeah, not even that. AI Google says 45,300 people.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, it's pretty sparse overall. It's not especially wealthy. I think probably remittances would be a big source of income. Because one of the perks of being an American territory is that you have free access to the American mainland.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to travel there for work, make some money, you can do that. And the money you send back home, even if it's just a little bit, will go a lot further than it will in the mainland U.S.
Right.
I think they do get some money from the U.S. government, too.
Mm-hmm.
Aid, block grants, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, but if the population is as low as you say, it would be pennies to the U.S. government. So
Yeah.
maintaining that is not super expensive. Hawaii has a much larger population
Oh,
than
yeah.
Samoa.
Much more so.
I got to go to Hawaii for the first time for my friend's wedding. Got to be best man. It was pretty cool. But it's a really, really beautiful place. Very, very remote. And that's part of what drives up prices, because a lot of people live there, but I don't think there's enough agriculture on the island to support the population at this point. So much of the food is imported. So groceries are super expensive compared to living on the mainland.
Yeah. Yeah, the Jones Act doesn't help with that.
Hmm. Libertarians' favorite talking point.
It really is.
The
It
Jones
really
Act.
is. Yeah, the Cato Institute is beside itself whenever it talks about it.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Is there
But yeah,
anything else that you wanted to point out with this one before we switch to the after? Because this is before World War One, the
yeah.
territories that the various countries had. I will flip it to the other one. Okay. So we decided that dark red is Japan.
Yeah.
So they got basically not quite everything that Germany had, but a lot of it. All
Mm-hmm.
the upper part. Guam still stayed U.S. Looks like Britain got some of what Germany had as well.
Yeah. New Guinea specifically, and Nauru, and the Solomon Islands.
I guess that's just a thing that happens after World Wars is you just take up people's territories and give them to others.
Pretty much. Losing a war has consequences.
Yeah. No more islands for you.
I'm a little curious now about the Marshall Islands, because I remember the Japanese attacked that during World War II. So I'm wondering if they hung on to that after they got it.
Yeah, I guess you could do a Japanese imperial one too. Because didn't they take more territory than this during their imperial phase?
Oh, fuck yeah. Yeah, they went well to the south and east.
Oh, I
Oh, you know what
randomly
I'm.
saw a video of someone mentioning that it's going to be Korea's Independence Day pretty soon, which was 1945. They're free from Japan. And it's just interesting that you don't really think about that when you're thinking about Korean history, but that's when the country kind of regained itself. And they celebrate that. I think they call it the Day of Light. But Japan was not very nice to Korea.
No, I'm afraid not. They very much got the Irish experience.
Hmm.
Okay, so you wanted World War II.
Yeah, what did Japan take?
Let's see. Okay.
Chat is
Well,
asking, as you're doing this, in which sense was World War One a global war in this region?
I mean, it did see some combat operations, but not nearly as many as it would see during World War II. So, Germany, for example, invested in, I don't think they were pocket battleships at that time, but they had this specific class of battleship that was designed to be slightly smaller and faster than a normal battleship. And
Mm.
it was basically intended to be a commerce raider. So the idea was that rather than fighting the Royal Navy like out in the open, they would send out individual commerce raiders to go out and then do effectively the naval equivalent of hit and run attacks on cargo ships of one kind or another.
Mm-hmm.
So basically harrying the Entente, the yeah Entente's supply lines. It was actually pretty effective for a while. The Royal Navy really struggled to contain them. For one, the ocean is massive, so it's very hard to find like individual ships.
Mm-hmm.
And the other problem is that even if they found them, the patrol ships that generally discovered the German ships were much weaker than the German ships because the British patrol ships were generally like destroyers, maybe cruisers, what have you. So they were generally a whole class lighter and smaller than the light battleships that the Germans were using.
Mm-hmm.
And so the Germans actually bested the Royal Navy in several engagements very early in the war, not only in the Pacific, but in other areas. just because they had that advantage. The British did eventually destroy all of them, but it took them a while, and the British media was not happy about losing even those early skirmishes. They saw that as embarrassing. Okay, what are we doing here? Let's see. They did not get all of the Solomons, but they got a lot of them. I guess I could just use a line here. Are you familiar with the Battle of Guadalcanal?
Guadalcanal. It sounds
Yeah.
familiar. Did we talk about it during Pacific Theater?
Oh, fuck yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, the Battle of Guadalcanal is one of those legendary battles in American military history. If you're interested in learning more, you can very easily find documentaries about it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was definitely one of the seminal moments in the history of the U.S. Marine Corps because they did most of the fighting there. This is going to take a minute. I've got to kind of finagle that.
You're good.
Okay. It's as good as that's going to get. Let's see. I think they did take Nauru. I looked it up. They actually did keep the Marshall Islands after World War One. I was thinking of the American campaigns later on. Whoops, not what I wanted. Okay, so the Marshall Islands, and then I think these would have been fuck, what were they?
These are the fuck.
I'm blanking out. Marshall Islands, and then south of them was the what? Man, I haven't thought about the Pacific Theater in too long. Would have remembered that easily a while back. Anyway, let's do this. Come on, there you go. Okay, that's gonna bug the shit out of me. I need to know the answer. Chains. Let's see. Nope. That's not helping. Gilbert Islands? I think that's right.
Yeah, that's Gilbert. I've heard of
Yeah, I
Gilbert.
think that's it. Okay, and then this is Tuvalu, and I don't think they got those. Yeah, there was some concern. There was enough concern at the time about the Japanese pushing down to Fiji and some of the other South Pacific island nations that the United States actually sent troops there to bolster the garrisons. So there actually was a U.S. military presence on many, many of these larger South Pacific islands early in the war effort. It was one of the first things the U.S. Navy did. Okay. They didn't take any of the Hawaiian islands, but they did raid Pearl Harbor, so make of that what you will. I can't really represent that on a map like this. Maybe I'll add an arrow just to give you an idea of just how far away the Japanese Navy had to travel. Because the main, actually, I can do that. I'll create a little star here for Truk. If you don't know what Truk is, that's an island in the Caroline Islands, the present-day Micronesia. That was the main base for the Japanese Navy in the Pacific at the start of the war. Let's see, we'll do, what color let's do orange for that. That's going to be right in the middle. So then we'll do the arrow. Actually, we'll do another orange for that. I think the ships that were deployed to attack Pearl Harbor actually came from different bases. Truk, I think, was one of them, but I think some also came from Japan, if I'm not mistaken. Where's Ohio? Right there. Oh, God. My apologies for the raggedy-assed arrow.
You're good.
Okay, so we're just doing Oceania, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. It's not going to look that impressive. They actually took way more territory to the west of Oceania. All right. So let's upload that. World War II. There you go.
Nice. We have another map. Okay. Oceania. It's a word that you read more than you say aloud. I get it. Okay. We have the map with the new raggedy ass arrow. So the arrow has the star that represents attacking Pearl Harbor. I'm guessing the star is where the attack was launched from.
Yeah, that's truck.
Huh.
Yeah, the United States never actually took truck during the Pacific War. They ultimately just ended up circumnavigating it, basically cutting it off from resupply and letting the garrison starve. They did bomb the shit out of it, though. There was a series of very intense raids that were launched on truck in, what was it? It must have been like 43, I guess. I think that was Spruance's campaign. Oh no, it was 44. Early 44.
So it looks like Japan primarily took territory that was formerly England's.
Yeah, they pushed south.
What was it like when they did that? Did they just take it by force?
Pretty much, yeah. Just landed troops there, took it. The garrisons are not that strong.
Mm-hmm.
Wasn't too hard. Oh, you know what? I fucked up. I didn't do Guam. Japan definitely took Guam.
Okay, so I'll just circle that with the mouse. This is maroon as well.
Yeah, that should be.
Was Guam taken back during the war or after?
During. Yeah, they took the entire Mariana chain by force. They wanted to do that because they wanted to use the Mariana Islands as a base from which to launch B 29 raids on Japan.
Mm-hmm.
So they took the Marianas Island chain, but they did not take the Caroline Island chain, which is where Truk was.
Mm-hmm.
Just bypassed that entirely, pretty much.
This just make me wonder if there was any dialogue between German and Japanese leadership during World War II regarding these islands, because some of these were formerly German controlled, and now they're Japanese controlled.
I don't think there was any, because there was no expectation on the part of Berlin that they were going to get them back.
No, I know. I just mean some like tongue-in-cheek banter about like.
Oh,
So now you have those colonies, kind of a thing.
just shit talking each other over the radio.
Yeah.
I don't know. It could be. Yeah, if there was, it wasn't recorded, at least as far as I know.
The banter of the diplomats.
Let's see. Okay, so I fixed Guam, and then I'll add Rabaul, since that's another point of interest.
What is that point of interest?
So there's a big island to the northeast of Papua New Guinea. That island actually has a really good natural harbor on it. And the British used that harbor to build a major naval base. And that actually anchored their position in the South Pacific.
Hmm.
Where exactly was Rebella? I don't remember. I'll just do it over the island.
A historian called John Smith. His parents never gave him a chance. It's a pseudonym. His name is not actually John Smith, but that's very funny. They gave him the most generic name.
Okay, I think I fixed it. So I'll save that and send that.
Nice.
Oceania correction.
Thank you.
Oh,
Yeah,
I'm looking it up. Apparently it's Truck Atoll, not Truck Island. My apologies.
Does truck mean something in another language, or is it just named after a truck?
TRUK.
Ah,
So not like the vehicle.
I see. Good to check, because a lot of people like trucks, especially out here in South Dakota. Has he done any Cold War stuff?
Not tonight, if that's what they mean. But we've certainly done quite a bit over the course of this segment's history.
Yep. We've been having these conversations for 10 years, basically. Well, longer than that if you count when we were just talking in college. We would kind of do this where we'll just randomly ask about a country and then we just start talking about some historical period for 3 hours. And it's pretty cool because some people just drink beer together, but we're at least learning something. So
Yeah, it's fun stuff. Okay. I guess, did we get any questions? We can do that next.
I don't know. You could check.
Nope. It's all right.
What's the subject? It could be anything. It could be current events. It could be world news. His background is in economics and history and stuff, so he can't really tell you like what real estate properties to buy. It's not really his bag.
Do not take financial advice from me. I am the absolute last person you should be asking for.
I don't know about the very
advice.
last. Yeah, he's not in finance.
No.
Your soul is still pure.
I guess that's one way of putting it.
There's more to life than just money. People have souls, or at least some level of dignity that deserves some respect.
There you go. Yeah.
Getting a bit
I
sleepy.
did finish. Sorry, what?
Getting a bit sleepy.
I'm just tired generally these days.
Oh.
Just getting old.
Did you try
fat.
creatine yet?
I have not tried creatine yet.
Okay.
Didn't that just get pulled?
Pull? What is pull?
Pulled, like removed from the market?
Oh, no. What?
I thought I was reading something about that the other day.
Huh. No, I don't think so. Is food health and safety the same as always in US?
No.
Yeah, it's different with this administration.
I don't know how different. I haven't read as much about that side of the Trump administration. But I do know they have been fiddling with things. They have made some changes. I'm sure a lot of the more impactful changes are going to be stuff we don't hear about until like years after he's out of office. The American government is just so big and the regulatory apparatus so massive. It's actually genuinely difficult, even for dedicated journalists, to keep track of all of the changes a government can make.
Mm-hmm.
And the Trump administration makes it even harder because they don't really like established procedures for doing, well, much of anything, but that included. So we're not going to know the full impact of Trump's second term until probably years after the fact. There's going to be stories for decades from researchers finding shit out. I'm sure it'll be a nice income stream for somebody.
Yep. Reporting on the goings on.
Okay, it's one specific brand or company that recalled their creatine.
I see. Yeah, it's pretty safe and well studied, and it's naturally occurring as well, so you can get it in food. It's just hard to eat enough food to kind of hit the amount that a human body can benefit from. I just have like, maybe it's a quarter of a spoonful of a little bit, either in my oatmeal or something like that. It doesn't really have flavor. It's just a little boost. It's supposed to have cognitive and performance benefits, so you don't even need to be like a gym bro to benefit from creatine.
Mm-hmm.
They've been saying that the elderly can also benefit from it too. Even the olds can use this.
Well, was there any other South Pacific stuff you wanted to do, or?
Do you know anything about Tasmania?
Tasmanian devils?
No.
Yeah, let me think. I know they have a hydroelectric dam they built down there. It doesn't have a big population. I think they had tigers at one point. Not like an actual big cat tiger, but they had like a Tasmanian tiger. Wait, I thought it went extinct. Yeah, it went extinct. Oh, okay. This is colorized footage from. Okay, there is like some film of the Tasmanian tiger, but it's like 100 years old. That was taken just before it went extinct, I think. 1936? No, 1933. There it is. Everybody and their mother is colorizing old footage now. It's a neat animal, though. I'll send that to you.
I think I may have seen it at some point, and I'll have to see if that's right.
Yeah, you'll probably recognize it pretty quick. But on the off chance you haven't, there's a Tasmanian tiger.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah, it's too bad they went extinct. It's real interesting. But the tiger is hardly the only animal on the Australian continent that's gone extinct.
Mm-hmm. How did people agree on what was to be done with Antarctica?
I think by treaty. It was in, what, the 60s? I think it was negotiated through the UN. Yeah, I haven't read the diplomatic history of the Antarctic Treaty that they resolved all those issues with. 1959 is what I'm seeing. Antarctic Treaty. The Wikipedia article is Antarctic Treaty System, though, so that implies there have been other agreements. Yeah, I would be hard pressed to give you like a full rundown of all the diplomatic agreements that regulate the territory there. I know that different states still maintain claims, although that's mostly just for legal reasons. If you stop claiming it at some point, it's going to be hard if later on, if the treaty collapses, for you to litigate in favor of the old claim that you abandoned.
Mm-hmm.
So nobody wants to give up their claims completely, just in case.
Yeah. Just in case it warms up and it's really nice later on.
You never know.
I heard about a valley in Antarctica that gets almost no moisture, and it's the closest environment on Earth to the surface of Mars. And they've tested like Martian equipment and stuff there.
Huh. That's pretty neat.
Yeah.
I would not want to work there, but it's very interesting that they do that.
You'll pass if they're looking for scientists.
Yeah, I'm good. I think I'm okay here in Texas.
Yeah.
Maybe if it were July.
Then you
Maybe
could
July in Texas, I would think about it, yeah. Was there some interest in the Cold War from chat?
Yeah.
Somebody been asking about it?
Mm-hmm.
Any particular aspect?
What do they consider this is just a question from me. What's the moment that kind of sparked it and made it an active thing?
There was no single moment. Like, there's not any clear-cut start date you can point to. It was kind of a gradual thing. You know, relations with the Soviets were somewhat terse during World War II, but they were decent. And that relationship declined slowly but steadily from the end of World War II into the late 40s.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there was just a whole litany of things that undermined confidence. Germany was probably the biggest single one. Yeah, we've talked about it before, but the plan for Germany after World War II was it would be a united state, right? It would not be partitioned. It would be neutral, so it would not be aligned with any other party, not with the U.S. or the Soviets, and it would be disarmed. And also, it would be deindustrialized, as I recall. So there would not be like big factories and stuff. It was supposed to be mostly rural.
That didn't hold up though, right? Because German economy is huge and they have huge industry.
Yeah, that's the issue. It would have had a big impact on the broader European economy, and more to the point, it would have been a humanitarian disaster because there's no way German agriculture could absorb all of the factory workers that would be thrown out of work by the collapse of German industry. So there would have been some kind of famine. Mm-hmm. It would have been pretty ugly. So that was not particularly realistic, and that was one of the first aspects of the plan that was abandoned. The trouble is that the United States abandoned it basically unilaterally. They did not really consult the Soviets on that. So Moscow was not pleased. To be fair, the United States itself was not altogether pleased with some of the unilateral shit that the Soviets were doing. One of the things the Soviets did is that they implemented a command economy in their occupation zone. And they did not ask permission to do that. They just kind of did it. It was expected that they would extract industry and send it back to the Soviet Union. They did that quite a bit. But the idea that they would unilaterally determine the form of economic organization in their territory, that was aggravating. Because that immediately put them at odds with the rest of the occupation zones where that was not happening. So that led to a debate about just what kind of economy Germany would have once there was a withdrawal of the Allies from the territory, when presumably it would become a neutral buffer state. And there was never any real agreement on that. Obviously, the Allies did not trust the Soviets to be fully impartial. You know, they saw the implementation of a command economy not just as an economic decision, but a political one. Because they believed that the Soviets had ties with communist parties all over the world and was cooperating with them to establish communist control of other states. So the Allies saw the imposition of a command economy as a kind of first step towards ensuring that some kind of native communist party would eventually be able to take power in the neutral German buffer state in the future and then align it with the Soviets at a later date. So once the Allies figured that they were not going to be able to come to an agreement there with the Soviets on just what the economy would be like, they started taking more unilateral steps of their own. So, for example, occupied Germany was suffering from hyperinflation. They didn't have any reliable currency, and so the Allies basically jointly introduced a new currency in the Western occupied part of Germany. And
Which
that
was
new
what?
currency, sorry, what?
Which was what?
The Reichsmark. Wait,
Reichsmark.
no, that's not right. The Deutschmark, there we go.
Deutschmark.
The Reichsmark was the old currency. Yeah, the Deutschmark was the new currency, and they would keep that for many decades. And the Soviets were very displeased with that because they saw that as a first step in rebuilding the German economy. And from the Soviet perspective, and actually also the French perspective, they believed it was necessary for the security of Europe for the German economy to be handicapped in the future. You know, they wanted it to be much smaller and less important than it had been. And they saw re-energizing the German economy as a first step towards revitalizing Germany and also, from their perspective, rearming Germany. A German economy that is hobbled is not one that's going to rearm and be as threatening to its neighbors. So the Soviets and the French believed that was necessary to secure Europe for the foreseeable future. So when the United States and Britain reneged on that and again started allowing, introduced the new currency and allowed other reforms, the Soviets believed that the United States and Britain were doing that because they wanted Germany to eventually rearm and be a kind of, what's the right word? Basically be their front line against the Soviets in a potential future war of aggression. So lots of mistrust, right? You can see how both sides didn't trust each other and assumed the worst in all of their actions. And so that invariably led to a deterioration in the security relationship until they very explicitly saw each other as rivals, planning some kind of aggression in the future.
It's interesting you say Germany was the front line. It makes sense, but with Russia where it is now, Germany is nowhere close to the front line. Ukraine is the front line. Finland is the front line for what Russia's trying to do. But yeah, I could see how that probably plays into Putin's ambition, as he kind of sees the old Soviet maps and wants to kind of re-expand some of that quote glory. But Germany is pretty far from Russia, so that kind of goes to show how much territory the Soviet Union had taken for itself. Because there were a lot of smaller countries that they took. I guess that's a whole conversation unto itself, is what was the progression of countries that the Soviet Union took and how did they do so?
That's actually pretty easy to explain because they just seized all of them at the end of World War II.
Oh,
After, we talked about it a little bit when we were doing the Eastern Front a while back. Basically, after Operation Bagration, Army Group Center collapses, the Red Army pushes through, and from that point on, the Red Army had the initiative in the war. And the Germans were not able to do much about it other than kind of delay the inevitable. So at that point, Southeastern Europe was kind of wide open. And the Red Army took advantage of that and just kind of pushed right through, took all of it, created puppet governments. There was some question about whether those puppet governments might eventually allow open elections. They would have been in the Soviet camp regardless, but there was some hope at least that they would at least pretend to allow a degree of autonomy. They did not. They disappointed everybody by basically imposing full-on like one-party communist rule in basically all of the states that they occupied. The ambiguity pretty much lasted until I want to say 47 or 48. Before then, there was plausible deniability that that was what they were planning, but I think in 47 they installed the communist dictatorship in Poland, and then 48 was Czechoslovakia. Apparently, Czechoslovakia was more traumatic for the United States, for the American public. Poland had not had a democratic government before World War II. They actually had a junta led by General Pilsudski, whom we talked about last time a little bit. But Czechoslovakia actually had been a democracy before World War II. And Czechoslovakia had actually partly been created with the assistance of the United States government during negotiations that were held as part of the Treaty of Versailles. So there was a sense amongst the American public that Czechoslovakia in particular was a country that deserved to be a democracy and to have their former democratic government returned. And that the failure of the American government to ensure that happened was a kind of disgrace. So that in particular was very disgruntling for the American public and caused much angsting, and also contributed to the deterioration in ties with the Soviet Union.
I see. Yeah,
they did not have that. Go ahead.
It sounds like to the U.S., it would feel like they're ruining the work that we did to encourage democracy in the region, and you're kind of undoing all of that effort and putting a system in that's going to be more oppressive.
Yeah, that's pretty much the gist of it. You know, there were people that were upset about Poland getting the communist government, but, you know, having not had a democracy before, it was kind of a lateral move in some ways. At least that's how it was perceived here. But with Czechoslovakia, like, they really had a democracy. And so there was a sense that they in particular were losing something by having a communist government imposed on them.
I see.
Yeah, the only exception was Yugoslavia. The Soviets never took that. That was largely liberated by Yugoslav communists themselves. So I don't think the Red Army ever blew through their territory like it did everybody else's. And as we've discussed before, they didn't get to Greece because at the Yalta Conference, Churchill very explicitly asserted that Greece was in the British sphere of influence and that the Soviets needed to stay out. So Greece ended up being liberated by a combination of Greek resistance fighters and the British Army.
I see. Chat's asking your thoughts on Persia and the shifts of 1979.
That's a big topic. I'm not sure what particular aspect of the revolution they're interested in. And what was the? It wasn't just about 79 though. What was the full question?
Your thoughts on Persia?
Thoughts on Persia. And the thoughts on Persia and the events of 1979. Well, I think they'd already changed their name to Iran by that point, so that's an early signifier of the trend line. Yeah, I mean, I think the revolution was probably inevitable because the Shah had alienated a lot of people. And keep in mind that, you know, there was a history in Persia that predates the CIA-backed coup in the 50s. And if you look at the political events in Iran over the course of the early 20th century, the events of the mid 20th century, you know, from the CIA coup to the 79 revolution, kind of make a lot more sense. It's not that surprising. That's how things played out. You know, Iran's government had actually already been heavily influenced by Western powers well before the 1950s. And the onset of the competition between the Shah and Mossadegh, the democratically elected president in the 50s, was not itself unprecedented. There had been previous incidences where Iran's parliament had kind of vied for more power within the country and had been suppressed. It's possible Mossadegh could have been the first to succeed because the Shah was very young, inexperienced, and was not known for being particularly forceful. His father had actually been very forceful. He was a very strong personality, and he had suppressed dissent many times. The only reason he wasn't in power in the 1950s is because he had kind of aligned more with the Axis in World War II. And so the Allies intervened and basically expelled him and put his son into power. So his son actually already had pretty close ties to the West. It was not that much of a stretch for the Western powers, specifically the British, to try to push him into suppressing a anti-foreign movement like Mossadegh's. So foreigners once again interceded. They got their way. Again, like that's not without precedent. And just like in previous cases, there was a backlash because nationalists did not like that. And the pressure just kind of built over time. You know, the Iranian government kind of took advantage of economic development and greater resources, not only from their own economic growth, but from aid from the United States in particular to build an apparatus of oppression that only got worse with time. So between the fact that the Shah had no real legitimacy in the first place and was seen as kind of a foreign stooge and had been for like many decades, between that fact, the fact that economic development was not evenly distributed, and the fact that the government was not really respecting the cultural preferences of broad swaths of the population, like it really was a very conservative country for the most part, and the fact that the Shah was not doing a good job of balancing different elites against each other. You know, the nobility, the landed elite, for example, the clerisy in Iran, all of them were kind of dissatisfied generally with the Shah, which meant that when things came to a head, he had no real natural allies. So the only unique thing about 79 is the fact that the rebels actually succeeded this time and actually threw out the Shah. In a way, you could consider that a part of a broader trend over the course of the 19th and 20th centuries where established monarchies were overthrown by popular movements. It's just that in the case of Iran, it wasn't a secular nationalist movement, it was a Islamist nationalist movement.
Mm-hmm. What was the, I guess, military tactic they used to take control?
I don't think it was an especially violent revolution. You know, mostly it was mass protests, you know, confronting the military with rioters, protesters, whatnot, a general breakdown in law and order, and also playing elites off of each other. You know, again, the Shah did not like have a lot of natural allies. So when unrest kind of hit a certain level, a lot of elites started hedging their bets and kind of shifting away from the Shah.
Mm-hmm.
And like I mentioned earlier, the Shah himself, you know, Shah Pahlavi, was not known for being like a forceful personality. So when things got tough, he had a tendency to kind of lean out. You know, he was very nearly, actually, he did abandon Iran in the 1950s when the competition with Mossadegh was at its height. He actually left the country and assumed that he had lost power. He had to be basically taken back by some of his Western backers. So for a long time, he kind of relied on a combination of foreign backing and his secret service to hang on to power. And that worked for a time, but you know, when the mass protests reached fever pitch, he ended up jumping ship again. I guess to be fair, it's worth mentioning that he was very sick by that point. He had cancer. And if you've ever known anybody going through chemotherapy, you know, that's a motherfucker.
Yeah.
So I kind of grade him on a curve a little bit. It's not entirely his fault. He was probably just generically fucking exhausted.
Yeah, it's tiring to throw off a coup normally, let alone with cancer.
Yeah. But regardless, he just did not have the gumption to really challenge it and meet the moment. Mm-hmm. And so that opened the door to the revolutionaries. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was a pretty traumatic moment for the American security architecture in the Middle East because Iran had very much been the Western anchor. Maybe not the Western, had been the anti-communist anchor for the region. Let's put it like that. So when Iran went, yeah, that blew a big fucking hole in the whole American plan for managing regional security there. There wasn't really any good alternative. You know, Turkey was there, but Turkey's relationship with the United States is, well, like you say, a whole conversation unto itself. That's a kind of a love-hate relationship if ever there was one. Iraq was kind of aligned with the Soviets, Syria also, more or less. There was Israel, but Israel was tiny back then, even smaller than it is now. The Saudis were aligned with the United States, but they didn't really have a military that could project power in the region. let alone deflect a Soviet aggression of one kind or another. There's a reason they're as dependent on the US for their security in the region as they are. So yeah, losing Iran really put the United States in a spot. The only consolation is that they did not immediately align with the Soviets. They were actually as antagonistic to the Soviets as they were to the United States. So the US loss in this case was not the Soviets' gain, which suited Washington just fine. Might not have been too bad if not for the Iran-Iraq war. The Iraqis invaded. I don't know if Washington thought they might be successful and maybe there would be a return to a friendly government in Iran, but they did back the Iraqis. And the result was a long, protracted war that lasted most of the 1980s. Didn't really have a lot to show for it in the long run.
We had another question I saw. It was, why is the US banning so much Chinese tech, like robot vacuums and drones? Might be unintended consequences to US companies by limiting free trade of hardware and AI.
I might have to look at that. Is that a recent question?
Yeah, I just.
Oh, I see it. I see it. Banning the robot drones, that might there be in the US company? Oh yeah, okay. This is on trend. This is something that's been going on for a while now. Basically, the US government has gotten more and more concerned over the past, let's say, 10 years about trade with China, and has been looking for ways to pressure China into reaching some kind of overarching agreement to manage trade issues between the countries. So in some cases, this is just more about generating leverage so that we can offer access to the American market in exchange for something else that we want from them. In other cases, there are genuine security concerns about having Chinese technology be preponderant in the American market, sometimes due to surveillance reasons, other times due to a sense that there needs to be an American alternative to certain strategic products of one kind or another. So, over the past year or so, they've they've implemented a ban on certain Chinese robot, like the guy asking the question, specified. There was a ban on Chinese robots. There's been restrictions on Chinese electric vehicles. I think there's been a couple others. I have them in my notes somewhere, but I don't remember where, so I can't go through the full list. But that's just on top of ongoing efforts to restrict investment into China, or at least to manage it, and also to manage Chinese investment in the United States. And the FCC has also been going out of its way to find excuses to restrict access to this, that, or the other Chinese technology. So yeah, there's different motives for it. I don't think there's any one single impetus, but the thing linking them all together is concern about trade with China. That's basically the overarching theme there. Yeah, I remember in the first Trump administration, the FCC went out of its way to basically expel all Chinese routers from the American market. So you can't buy them here, really. You could probably get them by mail if you order, I don't know, Amazon or some other third-party market system. But technically, you're not allowed to import them and sell them. I think that's how the restriction works.
That was one of the, not exactly a culture shock, but definitely a difference in aesthetic when I went to the mall in Cancun. And there's a bunch of Huawei stuff all over the place. Don't see that in American malls.
Yeah, the American government did try to pressure other countries into blocking Huawei and their tech, specifically networking tech like routers, from their markets. And they failed pretty miserably. I think they had some success in Europe, but the vast majority of the developing world prefers to import Huawei tech just because it's more affordable. Mm-hmm. It makes much more sense for them to do that than to expel them. Yeah, this sort of tech competition with China is a developing story that's been kind of evolving intermittently here and there over the past 10 years, but it's hard to kind of pin it down and explain it in one particular way because it's been very hit or miss. Again, intermittent is the word I would use. There's not a single strategy, there's not a single overarching plan. The United States is famously bad at developing plans for China. There's been efforts to develop an overarching strategy, a master plan, so to speak, for how to deal with the perceived threat posed by China, but nobody even past the previous 10 years, going back decades, nobody has managed to do that. And the result is that America's China policy is kind of schizophrenic. It kind of jumps from one thing to the other, depending on what issue seems pressing at a time. And I don't doubt that some of it is bullshit. At this point, politicians realize they can use the China threat, quote unquote, to get in the news, to get famous, to kind of make a name for themselves. So sometimes they'll invent bullshit to get excited about just so that they can pretend to be solving a problem. I can't remember which house of which branch of I can't remember if it's the House or the Senate, but one of them has a China committee, and their whole thing is basically just finding reasons to be upset with China. Yeah, some of it is substantive, a lot of it's not. Most of it is just attention whoring behavior on the part of the congressman sitting on the committee.
Is that the group that'll help us find the spy balloons? That was one of the funniest stories that we've had. Just a balloon blows over a big part of the U.S. Oh my gosh, we're being spied on by a balloon.
Yeah, people love finding things to be upset about. That was just the latest and greatest. That did kind of sabotage talks between the Biden administration and the Chinese government for, what was it, 4 months, 6 months, whatever it was?
Yeah. We can't be friends. You've been peeking at us with a balloon. Yeah, well, we do have... I feel like, what can a balloon see that a satellite can't? It's closer to the ground, so definitely a higher res image.
Well, it could also just be that their satellite tech is just not as good. So if the surveillance vehicle in question is closer to the ground, you don't necessarily need equipment that's as high resolution, that can produce as high resolution as you would need on a satellite in orbit. Might be cheaper too. And they've been doing it for a while without consequence, so, why not? But yeah, the tech competition ties into the overarching trading relationship, and that ties into the tariff war and all that stuff. And yeah, if you've been paying attention to the trade war with China, you know that it's just very, again, schizophrenic. Like it's hot for a couple months, and then it's cold for a couple months. There doesn't seem to be an overarching like objective or set of objectives. It just kind of seems to be the president doing whatever. But even during the Biden administration, when they were actually respecting normal processes for dealing with problems like this, they didn't really have a good answer. Like they spent the first, 6 months, maybe more than a year of the Biden administration trying to come up with a policy paper to outline a China strategy. And when they finally produced one, it was pretty milquetoast. They didn't really have much to show for the effort. The problems posed by China are probably not going to be resolved by the current cohort of American leaders, shall we say. We're probably going to need some new leadership to come in and have some, at least some focus to deal with the problem and some trade-offs. But we're just not in that headspace right now. Right now the government is just treating the whole China issue as something that they can kind of put off and just exploit for political points more than actually substantively address the problem. I think I was scrolling through chat looking for that question, and I saw somebody else asking something about the Middle East.
Yeah, sure, you can hit it if you found one.
Something about strong manning American Cold War policy in the Middle East. Is that what it was? That's
Yes.
a big topic.
Yeah. Well, we have 20 minutes. You can tackle as much of it as you want to.
20 minutes for American Cold War policy in the Middle East. Wow. Well, let's see.
For people
What's
in
a
an
good.
extreme rush.
So, at the start of the Cold War, the Middle East was seen as being more in the British sphere of influence. And so that was kind of their job. The United States helped them out, but the main US foreign policy thing there was building the relationship with the Saudis, specifically Saudi Aramco, and the handshake deal between Roosevelt and what was his name? The leader of Saudi Arabia at the time, King Faisal, I think it was. Somebody in chat can correct me on that. But yeah, that was sort of the plan, and that actually led into the tiff between the whole CIA coup in Iran was actually the result of a tiff between the Iranian government and the British, because it was actually what was it, British Petroleum that had the main interest in Iranian oil. And their inability to kind of resolve that issue is what led them to drawing in the United States. I think part of the quid pro quo there is that Washington would help them in exchange for more access for American firms to Iranian oil, something to that effect. I don't remember all the details off the top of my head. But after that coup succeeded, like I mentioned earlier, Iran became the centerpiece of American security architecture in the Middle East. Iran was the strongest country. It had a lot of manpower, a lot of resources. So it kind of made sense to build them up as the main deterrent to Soviet aggression there. Turkey also was important, but that was kind of part of the European theater a little more. They did try to incorporate Iraq early on. Actually, the first major the first major alliance in the region designed to counter and deter Soviet aggression was the Baghdad Pact, which was signed in Iraq. So Iraq was a founding member, but I think they were only a member for like a couple years before there was a Ba'athist coup. So basically, a pan-Arab nationalist authoritarian political party seized power there. They didn't trust the West, and they were not especially trusting of the Soviets either, but they were more inclined to work with them. So they somewhat aligned in the Soviet direction in the Cold War. Regardless, they were not a part of the American security architecture anymore. I think there was a similar series of events in Syria, although that gets a little more messy. There was a whole series of coups in Syria in the 1950s. Some of them the West was involved in, and some of them not. Let's see. So that's Iran, Saudi Aramco, and I guess Israel would probably be the main interests. Although Israel was a very minor interest early in the Cold War. The main role the United States played was in voting in the, what was it? It was like a big vote at the UN regarding whether or not Palestine would be partitioned into Palestine and Israel. And there was some debate within Washington about what to do about that, and ultimately they leaned into voting for Israeli independence. But after that, they were not actually that invested in Israel's success. Israel actually had to rely more on other countries for aid. I think in the 48 war, they actually relied a lot on Czechoslovakia for aid, weirdly enough. And then after that, in the 50s and 60s, they had a much closer relationship with France than they did with the United States. I think it wasn't until the Six-Day War in 67 that the United States started really getting much closer with Israel. And at that point, the alliance with Israel became much, much more important to the overall American foreign policy in the region. Yeah, before that, more of kind of a minor consideration, maybe even an irritant, depending.
Aside from it lasting 6 days, what was the 6 Day War?
Let's see, that was no, that was 73. So the 67 Six-Day War was a planned Arab attack on Israel but the Israelis preempted with an early attack of their own, which actually wiped out all of their air forces on the first day. I think that was Egypt, Syria. I don't think Iraq was in the Six-Day War, were they? Egypt and Syria, at least. I'm not sure what other countries participated, at least not off the top of my head. Yeah, Egypt and especially Syria were easily Israel's main rivals in that period when they were regularly like skirmishing with surrounding Arab states. Do we want to count Egypt as part of the Middle East here? That's
Yes.
technically North Africa, but it is Arab.
Yeah, I think they're too big of a player in the region to not count,
Gotcha.
even though they're technically on the African continent.
Yeah, Egypt was a major consideration because Egypt was actually the largest and most important Arab country. It's still pretty important now, but its influence in the region has kind of been eclipsed a little bit by other actors, probably the Saudis preeminently, but even the Qataris and the Emiratis have a lot of pull now in the region. But back in the day, Egypt was the heavyweight. Like, not even just demographically, its economy was the largest. Its military was the most powerful Arab military in the region. Even culturally, it was enormously influential. Egyptian media was like the dominant Arab media for a very long time. So Washington had hoped to cultivate a good relationship with Egypt in the early going. And that seemed feasible because at first, in the late 40s, it was still governed by a pro-Western monarchy, which had been principally been backed by the British. But then in the early 1950s, there was a coup that was led by an Egyptian officer named Nasser, and he was a pan-Arab nationalist. He set up a military junta and kicked out the old monarch. And so at that point, it was a little unclear what direction Egypt would go. It was not seen as inevitable that they would align with the Soviets. And Washington kind of hoped that they could still maintain good relations with the new government. That's part of the reason why the United States actually backed Egypt in the Suez Canal crisis in '56, which was sort of the last hurrah for European imperialism there. They kind of planned that with the Israelis, but did not really consult the United States. And so Washington cracked the whip on them and forced them out of the Suez Canal region. So the Eisenhower administration at that point was still kind of angling for a positive relationship with Cairo. They might have done it anyway, I don't know, but that was certainly a major factor. It wasn't until later that it was clear in the late '50s, early '60s that Nasser was going to lean more towards the Soviets than to the West. And at that point, the relationship soured. But again, the principal problem Egypt posed to the United States, besides the Suez Canal, was to Israel. And again, Israel was not a big consideration until '67. So there had already been considerable violence between the Israelis and Egyptians even before that, and not even just in 1948. There was a whole long period of time when they were violently skirmishing with each other on their border in the 1950s. So the '67 war was not really that big a surprise in the grand scheme of things. Tensions had been building for a while. But anyway, I guess the gist of that is the main interests after '67 in the region were Israel, Saudi Aramco, and Iran. Those were basically the three pillars of the American position in the region. And like we already talked about, losing Iran just blew a giant hole in that whole plan. Mm-hmm. They were kind of lucky in a sense because the peace process between the Israelis and their Arab neighbors had actually progressed pretty considerably. Partly that was because the Arabs had not received enough support in the Yom Kippur War. So in the Yom Kippur War, Egypt and Syria launched a surprise attack on Israel that was actually pretty successful in the early going. But eventually the Israelis were able to rally with American support and push them out. and then start pushing into their territory. And at that point, the Arab nations that had attacked them, again, Egypt and Syria, asked the Soviets for help, and the Soviets basically said no. And that was a big deal for Egypt in particular, because they saw that as proof positive that the Soviets were not going to be reliable enough allies to allow them to project power in the region, to defeat the Israelis, etc. And so they decided to shift away from a Soviet alignment and embrace the United States. And that actually led into the Camp David Accords, where the Egyptian government finally signed a peace agreement with the Israelis. So that marked the beginning of Egypt's alignment with the United States in the Cold War. And like I mentioned before, Egypt was like a big deal in the Middle East, especially in the Arab, well, again, not the Middle East, but in MENA, Middle East and North Africa, and was a major Arab state. So getting them into the American camp was a major diplomatic victory for the United States in the Cold War. And that helped kind of soften the blow of losing Iran, because both of those events happened at roughly the same time. The Camp David Accords, I think, were like 78, 79, and then the Iranian Revolution would have been 79. So that helped stabilize the American position a little bit. And then the Iran-Iraq War, of course, tied down Iraq. Well, it tied down both Iran and Iraq, and given that both were rather hostile to the United States, that suited Washington fine. And then Syria, meanwhile, was kind of bogged down in a long, bizarre conflict in Lebanon. The Lebanese Civil War got real messy in the 1980s. And basically, the Syrians occupied the northern half of Lebanon, and then the Israelis occupied the southern half. And they were basically fighting a proxy war there against anybody and everybody. Again, very messy conflict. But that tied down the Syrian military for the most part. And so that meant that yet another Soviet satellite in the region was a little too preoccupied to cause trouble elsewhere. So if you were a Soviet satellite state, well, a satellite is too strong, a Soviet aligned state in the Middle East in the 1980s, you were not having a good time. The Iraqis were tied down with the Iranian conflict, which was hugely expensive and bloody, and the Syrians were tied down in Lebanon. The Saudis, meanwhile, were doing fine. They didn't have to worry too much about any of that. Yeah, so the Israelis were pretty safe. They were projecting power in Lebanon. The Saudis were fine. Egypt was doing fine, getting a lot of military aid from the United States as a result of the deal in 79. And then the Gulf was, well, actually, the Gulf was relatively active in that time. Because as a result of the Iran-Iraq War, the Iranians tried to pressure the United States by trying to disrupt the supply of oil through the Strait of Hormuz. And the United States was not that interested in allowing that, and so that resulted in what came to be called the Tanker War, when the U.S. Navy fought a kind of de facto quasi-war with the Iranians for control of the Strait of Hormuz. That conflict went considerably better than it's going now. Part of the reason for that is that the Iranians were not going all out. Like they had almost all of their resources tied up with fighting the Iraqis. And so the result is that we didn't really have to face the full brunt of what they could offer. And what they could offer at that time was still very limited. Iran in the late 80s was still pretty much a revolutionary state, was still trying to kind of build a new government after the revolution. And the fact that they had to do that while fighting a war for 10 years had severely disrupted the process. So they didn't have nearly the same capabilities then as what they have now. And that meant that the US Navy found it relatively easy to ensure the security of energy supplies through the Strait of Hormuz. But that wasn't really part of the Cold War, per se, which is nominally what we're talking about here. That was more of a bilateral Iranian-American deal. I guess I would be remiss if I didn't mention Yemen, because Yemen technically was active during the Cold War. So what happened in Yemen is that it was divided, for one. It was divided into North Yemen and South Yemen. North Yemen was controlled by a sort of pseudo-theocracy. I can't remember the name of the Islamic sect, but it was sort of this weird offshoot Shia sect. And then South Yemen had been a British territory. North Yemen had not been colonized, by the way. It basically retained most, for the most part, retained its independence through the 19th and 20th through the 19th and 20th centuries. But South Yemen had been a British colony, and the city of Aden in particular had been an important British naval base from which they projected power in the region. They received independence from the British in the, I want to say, late 60s, early 70s. And that saw them adopt a Soviet-aligned socialist government, as I recall, anyway. And that meant that they were aligned more with the Egyptians as far as regional alignment and against the Saudis, which wasn't too big a deal, really, until there was a revolution in North Yemen. And the revolution in North Yemen was backed by the Egyptians because it was a pan-Arab nationalist revolution. The Saudis, for their part, were very threatened by that, and so they supported the established government there. And the result was a massive proxy war, fought mostly between the Saudis and the Egyptians. It didn't really tie into the Cold War too much, but the Egyptians were, again, Soviet aligned at that time, and the Saudis American aligned. So there was some nominal concern that, in so much as the Egyptians were Soviet aligned, that maybe the Soviets would get another friendly state if the Egyptians were successful in overthrowing the government in North Yemen. So there was a long, nasty war that resulted in North Yemen as a result that actually bogged down the Egyptian army for the better part of a decade. That was kind of their Vietnam, actually, for a long time. They actually did deploy troops to it, as I recall, but they didn't have the resources at that time to deploy a whole lot of forces. Yemen is not very far from Egypt, but for a very poor country, projecting force beyond your borders is very difficult. It is actually very expensive. Yeah, I guess I should talk about Britain too, since I mentioned them. The British had considered the Middle East their sphere of influence. The Americans kind of respected that, but the British Empire was in dire financial straits after World War II. And so they spent much of the 20 years after that war winding down colonial commitments. And by the 1960s, it was clear that was going to have to involve basically the Middle East. And the U.S. government was not entirely happy about that because it was obvious that when the British withdrew from the Middle East, the United States was going to have to escalate its involvement there. And they already had security commitments all over the world at that point. But there wasn't really an alternative. The British just didn't have the money. And so they had to withdraw, what was it, east of Suez, I think is the technical name they had for it. East of Suez kind of referred to the British domain, again, obviously east of the Suez Canal. So that encompassed South Asia, Southeast Asia, just all of the British Asian territories of one kind or another. So the withdrawal from the Middle East in the late 60s, early 70s was a big watershed moment as far as the decline of the British Empire. And again, the US pretty much just moved into that vacated space. A lot of the smaller Arab states in the Gulf, like the UAE, Qatar, Kuwait, they had basically been protectorates of the British, but they had never been formally annexed into the British Empire per se. And so when the British left, it was pretty easy. Like they didn't have to set up new governments like they did in other places. They effectively already had independent governments, but they were losing a security partner. And so the United States moved in and became informally the protector of those countries. And that's basically been the crux of the security relationship between America and the Gulf states ever since. That's more than 20 minutes, isn't it?
No, you're right about on.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, good job.
Yeah, that's probably about as much detail as I'm getting into 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there's stuff I'm missing. But yeah, that's just off the top of my head.
Well, the fun of meandering answers is they can go as long as you want. So,
Yeah,
good job with a timed one. Well, very cool.
So hopefully that sufficiently answered the question. Maybe next time we can get into some of the other details that we couldn't get into here.
Yes. The broader your question, the better it is to deliver it early in the segment, just due to time limitations. Yeah, appreciate everyone's feedback. I'm extra grateful of my chat today because of my chat yesterday.
Well,
And it wasn't really that bad. It was basically just two hecklers, two separate hecklers from the Dota category who just show up really opinionated, really hostile. And because my
mhm.
chat is so polite all the time, the hostility is super obvious. And everyone kind of agrees. And I have a feature in my channel where you can spend channel points to time someone out so they can't type for a little bit. And two people timed one of the hecklers out, but the people who are being really argumentative, they don't see what they're doing as wrong. They have their position as being justified. I'm justified in my anger toward this chat, toward this broadcaster, whatever the topic ended up being. And it was really funny reading a line from them saying that we are all liars and hypocrites. That's so dramatic, such dramatic language to be accusing a random internet room of such a thing. Most people here are just here to chill, watch video games, maybe see some cool strats, and laugh together. That's kind of the main bread and butter of what Twitch is about. But yeah, they really wanted to crusade for certain things. And then there was another person who was just talking shit, kind of generally. I would probably give them maybe a fourth grade level for their insults. It was probably about that level.
Well, that's generally what I assume the level of discourse on the internet is like, on average.
Yeah.
So, from my perspective, I'm grateful it doesn't happen more often. But I'm surprised it was a problem here. Generally, your chat seems pretty well behaved.
They were both first time chatters. So my people were good.
Ah,
They are to be held blameless, and I'm not upset with any one of mine. It's one thing that I'll kind of check whenever someone's being really edgy. I'll click their name, and you can see how long they've been following the channel and if they've subscribed before. Because most everyone who knows me knows that I value respect in how you talk to people. You can talk about almost any topic with someone if you're able to do so respectfully. And that's a life skill that not everyone values because some people like talking shit. They like mouthing off. They like that high energy, high hostility conversation. They enjoy that. They thrive in that. But that's not how we communicate with each other here. So whenever someone does, they stick out really easily. So that's it's just pretty funny to see the stark contrast. So credit to this community for being well behaved. These were just two random Dota people. And unfortunately, that's also why I never team up with random Dota chatters who are like, hey, do you want to queue together? I'm close to your rank. Absolutely fucking not. If I take you as the average Dota player, you're going to get my channel in trouble. So I have to say no to that. And you have to kind of build some reputation just because of that kind of hostile and oftentimes racist nature.
mhm.
But yeah, good job, Chad.
Well, sorry for going long.
No, you're good. You were good. I was going on a rant to put us a little over time.
Oh,
That's on me. Yeah, awesome.
thank you for having me. Always a pleasure.
Yes, sir. Did you get your walk in this last week?
Oh, I did. It was very hot today. No cloud cover either.
Mm.
Yeah, just that pure Texas summer sun.
We've had a bunch of rain here. We had a very late wet season. So that's, I guess, good for the nature here, but we missed out on the meteor shower that was supposed to be last Thursday. There's a annual thing that's supposed to look really cool, and we're really far from cities, so my mom and I were all excited to like go out at 2 a.m. and look at the meteor shower, but we just got a rain shower instead. We couldn't see anything.
Gotcha.
Yep.
How much rain? You can't possibly get all that much rain up there, right?
No, it's pretty low. That's one of the reasons why it's low population.
Yeah.
Low rain, hard to yield crops. That's part of why the ranching industry, I think, is so much bigger here than farming. Because livestock can live off of whatever kind of soil a little bit easier. Plants, you kind of
Gotcha.
need specific earth.
Understood.
Yeah.
Well, it must be nice to get that rain when it does come.
Sure is. It cooled us off. We had almost Texas levels of heat. It was in the 90s almost every day for a couple weeks, and the rain cooled us off, so grateful for that. Well, cool. Appreciate your expertise as always, Agent Smith. Thank you, chat, for your time. We'll see you on the next episode of World Discussion with Agent Smith.
Yeah, thanks again. Always a privilege. Talk to you next time.
GG.